a kind-hearted nurse stayed beyond her shift to comfort a dying stranger. When she found a crumpled photo in his pocket and saw who it was, she began to cry upon realizing that night had already spread its dark mantle over San Hilario Hospital. A strange contrast reigned in its corridors. In the new wing, gleaming operating rooms and specialized wards attended patients with expensive health insurance, while in the emergency and long-term care section, the staff struggled with shortages of supplies and chronic exhaustion. After more than 30 years of service, Nurse Ana Rios knew these tensions like the back of her hand. That night, she had already spent almost 12 hours on her feet, shoulders aching and brow furrowed, longing for the moment she could clock out and return home. Ana was a woman of serene, almost stoic countenance. Grey-streaked hair tied in a practical bun, fine wrinkles at the corners of her eyes, the result of countless sleepless nights and so many mornings contending with bureaucracy and constant stress. On that particular night, she wanted nothing more than to leave the hospital, shower, and let the whistle of the kettle in her small kitchen remind her that a world existed beyond the cold neon glare and the beep of the monitors. However, just as she was reviewing her patient's charts one last time, the ER doors burst open. A paramedic entered, pushing a stretcher bearing an unconscious elderly man. The dim light in the hall revealed a pale face, almost translucent skin. Ana immediately sensed how serious the case was. He carried no documents, had no one accompanying him. Someone had called an ambulance, and here he was, without identification, no known medical history, barely clinging to life. All around, the emergency department looked like an overflowing anthill, staff running about, some patients waiting wearily, others complaining in plastic chairs. Amid that nocturnal chaos, Ana felt morally compelled to stay a bit longer. A couple of minutes, she told herself, just to stabilize that unknown patient. She checked his vitals, a weak, erratic pulse, shallow breathing, cold skin to the touch. She found old scars on his chest and abdomen, deep tracks that spoke of past battles against illness or poverty. It was impossible to know at first glance. She tried to find a clue among his meager belongings. In one trouser pocket, just a dirty handkerchief. In his shirt, a wrinkled photo. She unfolded it carefully under the cold gleam of a small lamp. What she saw took her breath away. There was her own face, young and radiant, on the day of her nursing graduation. Beside her stood Dr. Richard Scott, her mentor from years ago. She felt her hands tremble. Scott had been one of the most admired physicians at San Hilario until a malpractice scandal devoured him, causing him to vanish without a trace 20 years earlier. Why was this photo in the hands of that anonymous old man? Where had it come from? It was impossible to contain the questions. Ana barely heard a colleague calling for help with another patient in the adjoining room. Her attention was trapped by the image. She remembered Scott's kindly gaze, his patience with young residents, the way he taught them to listen to patients before listening to the hum of the machines. Ana, who believed herself immune to nostalgia, felt her eyes grow moist. The hospital, the decades, the disappointments, all of it had been buried over time, but that photo stirred up a painful sediment. There was no time to sink into memories. The old man on the stretcher gasped, his chest heaving with effort. Ana reacted instantly. She administered oxygen and asked an intern to prepare an IV. The rest of the staff were so busy they hardly noticed her distress. She worked on autopilot, but her heart was pounding furiously. The night grew thicker, each second more tense. The cardiac monitor emitted irregular beeps. Ana leaned over the old man, trying to stabilize him. She moistened his dry lips, checked his pulse again. Meanwhile, her mind boiled with questions. Did this man have any real connection to Scott? Was he a former patient, a colleague, a relative, or just someone who had found that photo by pure chance? By now, the emergency hallway was almost deserted. Beyond the glass doors, the city slept, indifferent to the small crisis unfolding within these walls. The white lights made the walls seem even paler, the air heavier. Anna could hear, in the distance, the wheels of another gurney creaking on the floor, nurses murmuring as they tried to organize clean sheets. For anyone else, this night at San Hilario was like so many others: hard work, awkward silences, the bitter taste of routine. For Anna, however, this night shone with a different hue. The crumpled photo was a crack in time, a reminder that the ghosts of the past still roamed these corridors. The man let out a faint groan. Anna held his hand. "Hang on," she thought fiercely, though she knew her anger wouldn't alter his clinical condition. Still, she couldn't let him slip away without trying something more. She checked his blood pressure, adjusted the IV lines, jotted down the numbers. The oppressive silence around her grew more pronounced. She couldn't recall ever feeling such fear. It was a subtle fear, not exactly for the stranger's life, but for the answers he might bring, for what his presence implied. Anna sensed that, in some way, she stood at a turning point in her long career, facing the possibility of finally understanding what had happened to Scott and of healing a wound she thought had never truly closed. Pressing her lips together, leaning over the stretcher, she tried to steady the old man's breathing. She set the photo aside, safely, as if it were a treasure to protect. Maybe when he woke up, if he woke up, he would tell her something. Perhaps at last she would learn the truth behind the scandal that had driven Scott from the hospital. Or maybe not. Maybe it was just a macabre coincidence, a lost scrap of paper that fate had tossed in front of her. The monitor's beeps counted each second like a sentence. Anna could not stop her heart from racing, pounding against her ribs. There in the nighttime stillness, with the city asleep and the hospital nearly motionless, she faced a ghost from the past. The scene seemed frozen. Her, the old man, the photo, the tension saturating the air. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathed deeply, and devoted herself entirely to saving that life. The truth, if it was to come, would come later. For now, her duty was to prevent that life from ending without answers, without closure. The night was only beginning. The old man now lay on a stretcher in the observation room, connected to a monitor struggling to track unstable rhythms. His vital signs formed a fragile mosaic: ragged breathing, erratic pulses. Anna, standing beside him, still held the photo in her hand, the same one that had chilled her blood minutes before. Under the dim fluorescent light, it looked even more worn and yellowed, an echo from another time. Dr. Paula Smith, a young resident physician, emerged from behind a curtain. Her eyes, still filled with the fresh passion of someone who believes they can change the world with their profession, immediately noticed the unease on Anna's face. The nurse, usually unflappable, seemed to tremble slightly, brow furrowed and lips tense. "Anna, are you all right?" Paula asked softly, almost afraid to shatter the delicate balance of the atmosphere. "I don't know, Paula," Anna murmured, without taking her eyes off the photo. "Do you know who Dr. Richard Scott is?" Paula tilted her head. That name rang no bells. She had heard stories about distinguished doctors who had passed through San Hilario, but never about a Scott who left such an indelible mark. Anna, swallowing hard, summarized what she knew. Scott had been a much-admired and respected physician years ago, practically a mentor to many generations of young residents. A man with impeccable ethics, until a malpractice scandal abruptly removed him with no clear explanations, making him vanish almost overnight. Paula was astonished. How could none of this appear in the hospital's shared histories, the veterans' recollections, or the anecdotes whispered in the hallways? While Anna tried to regain her composure, the old man on the stretcher emitted a low moan, a whisper rising from a well of buried decades. "Guzman. No. Green door," he said hoarsely, the words escaping his dry lips. Anna and Paula exchanged perplexed glances. Guzman? That surname surfaced in ancient records, as Anna vaguely recalled, a physician from the old guard who had retired long ago. And the green door. It made no immediate sense. It could be the delirium of an unconscious mind, or perhaps stray hints of a larger mystery. Paula frowned. Curiosity overwhelmed her. What secrets lay hidden within this hospital? What connection did this unknown man have to Scott? Anna tried to stay calm, but a storm raged inside her. She felt in some way that the past had returned to demand answers. The tension doubled when Dr. Salazar, head of medicine, burst into the room. He was a man of firm bearing and a calculating stare. He always seemed to know every piece on the board, and it was rare for anyone to guess his true intentions. When he heard that the old man might be linked to Scott, his face hardened. Immediately, he ordered Jenna Davis, the administrative director, to handle the matter with the utmost discretion. No rumors, no journalists snooping around, not even whispers in the cafeteria. Salazar's cold glance at Anna and Paula was a silent warning to keep their distance. Jenna, impeccably dressed with a tablet under her arm, nodded curtly. Her priority was the hospital's image, maintaining a spotless reputation and protecting the board of directors from scandal. Her body language betrayed discomfort at the mere mention of Scott's name, as though it were an insect to be quietly crushed. Paula observed the scene with growing indignation. Why such secrecy? She was a young doctor with clear ideals. A hospital should be a place of healing, not a cauldron of intrigue. Next to her, Anna felt nostalgia clawing at her chest. The memory of Scott, the man who inspired her to become a better nurse, was now overshadowed by suspicion. Was he truly guilty of that malpractice? Or had something else, a tapestry of power and lies, consumed his reputation? The old man continued to murmur in his feverish world, naming names and fragments without context. Each sigh seemed to evoke a piece of an unknown puzzle. Anna adjusted his pillow, trying to provide a hint of comfort. Paula, hands on her hips, forced herself to remain calm. If this man held answers, if his mere presence reopened a buried case, the situation demanded careful handling. "Paula, you'd better keep quiet about this," Anna warned gently but firmly, understanding the danger. "Salazar doesn't joke about these matters. If he says we must maintain discretion, you know what that implies." The young doctor nodded, but her eyes burned with curiosity. What kind of hospital hid its own history, erasing the name of one of its best doctors? Paula understood hierarchical power, administrative pressures, the moves to avoid scandals. But that did not justify ignoring the truth. As the monitor beeped irregularly, both women remained silent, watching the old man who had unknowingly stirred the ghosts of the past. Anna noticed her legs trembling slightly. Paula took a deep breath, holding back questions that hung in the air. Outside, in the corridors, the hospital seemed to follow its usual course. Nurses carrying trays of medications, gurneys in motion, doctors immersed in reports and diagnoses. But in that particular corner, time appeared to have stopped. A whisper from the past, a forgotten name, a green door. Cryptic signs that foretold the beginning of an involuntary investigation, a settling of scores with San Hilario's memory. Anna and Paula exchanged another glance. The old man slept fitfully. The photo rested in the nurse's pocket, and the words Scott, Guzman, green door drifted through their minds like rusty keys. Would it be possible to find the right lock? Perhaps soon they would have to choose between silent obedience or the courage to delve into a dangerous story. For now, all that remained was uncertainty and the vertigo of suspecting that beneath the hospital's prestige and whitewashed walls, there were secrets no one wanted brought to light. By the first light of dawn, San Hilario Hospital was already in full swing. From very early on, nurses, residents, and physicians circulated among consultation rooms, ER stations, and observation units. It was a peculiar hospital. While the main facade and the more modern wings shone with technological splendor, other parts felt left behind, nearly invisible to donors and the press. A careful observer would discover that San Hilario was more than a medical center. It was an unequal system, where certain areas thrived under the gaze of benefactors and institutional publicity, while others withered for lack of resources. On the main floor, near the main entrance, the plastic surgery and cardiology area resembled a luxury hotel. Gleaming floors, cutting-edge equipment, comfortable chairs for wealthier patients. Immaculate curtains and well-trained smiles promised an elitist service, with private rooms and preferential treatment. There, patients with good insurance and influential connections were received, their satisfaction ensuring a steady flow of donations. But if one ventured further down the corridors, reality changed. In the ER, gurneys and wheelchairs were piled up due to lack of space. Nurses raced against the clock, trying to handle an excess of cases with limited staff. Tension reached a critical point in pediatrics. Dr. Johnson had been fighting for weeks against a hospital-acquired infection affecting several children. She needed stronger antibiotics, isolation beds, and specialist support, but her requests collided with an administrative wall. That morning, Johnson stood before Jenna Davis, the administrative director, in a narrow hallway next to the children's playroom, now unused because the kids were in isolation. Johnson was petite but firm, raising her voice without shouting, trying to convey that children could not wait. Jenna, with her haughty posture, replied impatiently, "Doctor, the board of directors has made it clear that priority investments go to the most profitable areas. If you insist on demanding more staff or expensive materials, we'll have to request another evaluation. For now, let's manage with what we have." The injustice struck Paula, who observed the scene from a corner. Newly hired, her vocation still intact, and her faith in medicine as a service unshaken, she fidgeted uncomfortably. How was it possible to prioritize profitability over children's health? Paula began to understand that the hospital was not the bastion of principles she'd imagined. She felt anger and helplessness, but also a growing determination not to be swallowed by that perverse logic. Meanwhile, Anna remained close to the room where the unknown old man lay connected to several monitors. His condition was critical but stable, a tense piece that could shatter at any moment. Anna watched him with professional care, but inside she could not shake the idea that this man was somehow connected to Dr. Scott. Perhaps he wasn't Scott himself. Scott would have been younger than this patient seemed, but maybe he was someone close to him, someone who knew the truth. In any case, his presence seemed to have set off alarms in the hospital. Mario, the orderly, approached her with the stealth of those invisible workers who know everything that happens behind the scenes. In a low voice, he whispered, "They're saying that old man could be Scott, or someone very close to him. People are nervous, Anna. They say Salazar doesn't want the matter mentioned aloud." Anna shook her head slightly, without confirming anything. But her silence was eloquent, and Mario understood that something was going on. He withdrew as quietly as he had arrived, leaving the nurse lost in thought. Scott, once a role model, now a name spoken in whispers. Why? What had been so grave that every reference to him had to be erased? Meanwhile, Dr. Salazar, head of medicine, was making his morning rounds. He walked firmly through the corridors, greeting some doctors with curt gestures and ignoring others. His gaze resembled that of a strategist, measuring every corner of the hospital as if it were a chessboard. Upon reaching his office, he found Jenna Davis waiting inside with a report. After reading a few lines, Salazar snapped dryly, "We need to contain this situation. I don't want information leaks or rumors in the press. If necessary, we'll further restrict access to certain records." Jenna nodded. Her worries went beyond pediatrics or the unknown old man. She feared for the hospital's image, the donations, and the alliances with insurers. Nothing good could come from stirring up the past. Paula, meanwhile, seized a free moment to venture into a corner of the hospital rarely visited, a small digital archive where old records were stored. She typed Guzman into the internal search. The system was slow to respond, producing partial results and missing documents. Almost no clear references, only vaguely related mentions of staff long since retired. The atmosphere around her seemed to thicken. Each click was a silent rebellion against the directives of silence imposed from above. The entire hospital seemed balanced on a precarious edge. On one hand, the promise of fame and prestige for the profitable areas. On the other, real suffering in pediatrics, an overwhelmed ER, staff stretched thin. And floating in the air, the enigma of the old man and his connection to Scott, a ghost from the past that could shake the institution's foundations. Anna felt the weight of the day on her shoulders. The previous night had been intense, and the hours to come promised more tension. Beside her, Paula breathed deeply, trying to convince herself to remain calm and discreet. But inside, a question pulsed. How long can one keep quiet without becoming an accomplice? The day had only just begun, and the hospital's priorities, internal pressures, and the mystery surrounding the old man were ingredients in an explosive mix. Each person, Anna, Paula, Johnson, Mario, even Salazar and Jenna, played a role in this silent drama, aware or not that San Hilario's balance hung by a very fine and taut thread. The morning had barely broken when Ana Rios crossed the doors of San Hilario Hospital with a soul filled with unease. She carried the weight of too few hours' sleep, the previous day's tension, and above all, the vivid memory of Dr. Richard Scott. The night before, alone in her small apartment, Anna had mentally revisited stories from her youth when she still believed medicine to be a sanctuary of integrity. For her, Scott represented the kindness of the profession, empathy, and rigor. The notion that his career had ended in disgrace had always seemed nonsensical. Now, with the discovery of the photo in that unknown old man's pocket, the past was erupting without asking permission. Anna felt every heartbeat more vividly. The idea that Scott might be connected to this man in the hospital bed unsettled her. Who was he? Had he come to deliver a message, to awaken ghosts from 20 years ago, or was it all just a grim coincidence? As she changed into her uniform in the locker room, she breathed deeply, trying to calm herself. But that day gave her no respite. The moment she stepped into the corridors, Jenna Davis approached with her measured stride and calculated smile. The administrative director, always so concerned with appearances, tilted her head and said without preamble, "Anna, I've been reviewing your years of service. You have a spotless record. The board considers you have worked with dedication and consistency." Anna nodded, not knowing what to expect. "We think that perhaps you could retire early with certain benefits," Jenna continued, her gaze serene and her posture unusually close. "It would be a way to reward your loyalty and let you enjoy life beyond the hospital." The nurse felt a chill. Retirement now, just when the past was resurfacing? Were they trying to discreetly remove her, to ensure her testimony and memories wouldn't disturb San Hilario's artificial calm? Anna narrowed her eyes. After so many years, who would suspect that she might know more than she let on? Perhaps her mere presence, her connection to Scott, posed a risk. "I'll think about it," Anna said softly, hiding her discomfort. Jenna nodded and departed. It was impossible not to feel that this proposal was actually an invitation to keep quiet. Anna remained there, by the supply cart, with the sensation that every corner of the hospital had invisible eyes and ears. Meanwhile, Paula continued her subtle investigation. She couldn't help it. Her sense of justice had been awakened. In furtive conversations with older nurses, she gleaned scraps of contradictory stories. Some said Scott committed an irreparable error in a critical surgery, that he was thrown out of the hospital and his name banned. Others, more discreet, murmured that perhaps the doctor was a scapegoat, a sacrificial piece to protect someone more powerful. Among these whispers, Paula thought she heard the name of Dr. Guzman, a now retired surgeon known for his efficiency and silence. Too much time had passed, and collective memory seemed fractured. Paula closed an old file with a sigh. Everything suggested the official version about Scott was incomplete. How did this place really operate? How many lies had been told to preserve the facade of prestige? The more she thought, the more she felt it was her duty to expose the truth, even if risky. She hadn't entered medicine to become complicit in a farce. Elsewhere in the hospital, the old man remained unconscious, his artificial breathing paced by the machine's rhythm. Anna approached his bed, checked his IV, moistened his lips gently. The man bore scars on his torso and arms, old marks that told of battles against diseases, accidents, or interventions. Each line on his skin was a story Anna didn't know. For an instant, she wanted to believe that if he woke up, he could explain why he carried that photo, what link he had with Scott, and why he had shown up so unexpectedly, shaking the foundations of her calm. The hospital buzzed around them with its own music, ringing phones, hurried footsteps, rattling gurneys, conversations in whispers. But Anna, leaning over the old man, felt as if she were in a bubble. In this man's hands might lie the key to understanding something that was never fully clarified, the downfall of an exemplary physician. The nurse noted the bandages covering part of the old man's torso. Underneath lay poorly healed skin, perhaps from past surgeries. Could he have been one of Scott's former patients? Someone who took years to return? Every question was an open wound, dripping uncertainty. The discomfort was palpable, not only in Anna, but also among much of the staff who sensed something odd in the air. From above, directives seemed to mutate. More silence, more secrecy. Salazar and Jenna patrolled like guardians of a narrative that must not be altered. Paula, on the periphery, sought the light. Anna, at the center, was trapped between loyalty to the hospital that had shaped her and the moral need to find the truth. The wounds of San Hilario were like the old man's scars, closed over time, but never truly healed. Now, with the photo and the memory of Scott resurfacing, those sores reappeared, demanding explanations. Anna felt that the coming days could be decisive. Early retirement, pressure from above, silence around a name erased from the hospital's history, all signs that old wounds were reopening, and this time they might bleed more profusely. A sigh escaped her lips. While gently caressing the old man's inert hand, she decided that, whatever the truth might be, she would not fade away without knowing it. The old wounds of San Hilario would not close with bribes disguised as retirement, nor with well-intentioned lies. Sooner or later, the light had to enter the dark room of memory, and Anna, heart in her throat, was ready not to look away when that happened. By mid-morning, San Hilario Hospital received a visitor no one had requested and many wanted to avoid: Nathan Ortega, a freelance journalist known for exposing medical scandals and irregularities in healthcare institutions. It wasn't the first time someone like him roamed a hospital's halls, but this time the discomfort was especially evident on the faces of Jenna Davis and her administrative team. Jenna hurried to intercept Nathan in the main lobby before he could slip into restricted areas. With a tense smile, she asked him coolly, "May I help you with something, Mr. Ortega?" The journalist, tall and sharp-eyed, raised his eyebrows. "I'm looking into the admission of an unidentified patient the other night. They say he arrived in critical condition, no papers. I was wondering if the hospital could provide some basic information." Jenna's expression hardened. "We have no record of anything out of the ordinary. We attend many patients every day. Without a proper order, I'm afraid we can't share clinical data. Confidentiality is a priority." Nathan noted her defensive tone. That too-rehearsed reply triggered his internal alarms. He thanked her without pressing further, but he didn't leave. Instead, he lingered in the corridors, feigning interest in the cafeteria, the internal pharmacy, and the informational panels. He spied out of the corner of his eye, listened to snippets of conversations, paused before a tired orderly or a hurried nurse, trying to unravel the secret the administration wanted to keep hidden. Meanwhile, Paula observed Nathan's comings and goings from a distance. Something about his determination reminded her of her own calling, the search for truth. But she was not a journalist. She was a physician, and her first impulse was to protect the patients. Should she talk to him? He could be an ally in exposing the injustices she was beginning to notice, the opacity surrounding Scott's name, the suspicious policy of prioritizing profitable areas over those in need. Yet she feared the repercussions. Salazar had already made it clear he wanted no negative publicity, and Paula was too early in her career to risk her position so lightly. Anna, for her part, weighed the facts cautiously. From an interior window, she watched Nathan as he spoke with an orderly. This wasn't the time to reveal anything. She herself was not sure about the connection between the old man and Scott. An unfounded scandal could further blacken her old mentor's memory if he was really involved. Besides, Anna suspected that the administration guarded documents that could clarify the past. If the journalist got ahead of events, perhaps the evidence would vanish or be manipulated even more than it already was. Mario, the orderly who had alerted Anna about strange goings-on, approached the nurse in a hurried step. "They're rummaging through archives in the basement," he whispered. "Administrative people going in and out with dusty folders, and there are guards posted near the less frequented wings. Looks like they don't want anyone digging into the past." Anna frowned. There was the confirmation of a covert operation to hide information. Was the journalist the catalyst they feared, or just the re-emergence of a case that had to remain buried? Behind the scenes, tension rose. Every conversation grew more guarded. Every door seemed to creak with greater suspicion. Paula was surprised to notice that her colleagues were nervous too. Some had seen Dr. Salazar pacing around with an enraged expression, issuing curt orders to Jenna. Was Nathan's presence a real threat, or just a specter stirring the guilt of those who had something to hide? Over time, Nathan noticed that no one wanted to speak openly with him. He encountered evasions, rigid smiles, and uncomfortable silences. But that didn't discourage him. On the contrary, it awakened his truth-seeker's instinct. He observed how Anna and Paula glanced at him furtively, how Jenna seemed to keep watch from a distance, and how certain corridors were closed off before he could enter them. Paula, clutching a folder to her chest, reflected. If she spoke to Nathan and hinted at something, it could spark a flame impossible to control. It could expose the malpractice, the silence of the past. But she also risked that her word would be taken lightly, without concrete proof. She still had no documents to back up her suspicions about Scott or the administrative manipulation. A premature hint to the press could be her undoing. Anna, more experienced and cautious, felt that pieces were missing before making this public. She wanted certainties. Scott deserved justice, not a whirlwind of baseless accusations that might ironically legitimize the lies told about him. Also, the old man remained in critical condition. What if he woke up? Maybe he was the key to understanding everything, and in that case, patience was the best strategy. A question hung in the air, unanswered. Does the truth need the media's spotlight to become justice? Anna struggled internally. Transparency was a double-edged sword. It could break the chains of oppression or shatter the innocent in the attempt. For now, she remained silent, watching Nathan leave the cafeteria without a single useful statement. The journalist did not depart satisfied. He carried with him a handful of suspicions and the certainty that something was hidden behind San Hilario's doors. He left without official statements, but with the promise to return. Paula, seeing him walk away, knew that time was running. Information would change hands, evidence might disappear, and the honest souls in the hospital would have to decide whether to remain silent or risk everything for the truth. The tension had climbed another notch. Amid whispers and furtive glances, the feeling was that any misstep could trigger a media earthquake, and with it, the revelation of wounds that had remained hidden for too many years. That afternoon, after a short shift at San Hilario Hospital, Paula Smith took a taxi to her father's house. Dr. Federico Smith, a retired surgeon of impeccable reputation, lived in a quiet part of the city, surrounded by gardens and clean streets. Paula usually dined with him at least once a month. As a child, she admired his professional dedication, his countless operating room anecdotes, and the respect his colleagues had for him. In her youthful memory, her father was a champion of medicine, a role model. Tonight, however, Paula arrived with a heavy heart. She needed advice, clarity. She had spent days in an ethical limbo, between the prestigious aura of the hospital and the shadows surrounding Dr. Scott's name, between the promise of serving patients and the scent of secrecy emanating from the administration. She hoped her father, with his experience, would give her the wisdom to face the coming storm. The family dining room had an elegant, sober air. A dark wooden table, candles lit in silver candelabras, a vase of fresh flowers. The warm, yellowish light draped the scene in a veil of serenity. Around them, family photographs hung on the walls. Paula as a child holding a school trophy, her father receiving an award for his career, her mother, now deceased, smiling in simpler times. After the initial greetings, the first minutes passed, speaking of trivial matters, traffic, weather, recent anecdotes of daily life. But Paula could not contain her internal tension. As soon as her father poured the wine, she took a deep breath and dropped the truth abruptly. "Dad, I've noticed something's off at the hospital. There's a mysterious patient, no ID, who seems linked somehow to Dr. Scott. You remember Scott, right? He was accused of malpractice many years ago. Now I can't find clear information. People get nervous hearing his name. Documents are hidden. There's pressure from the top, and a tense atmosphere I don't understand." Dr. Smith, who had been listening attentively, frowned. "Paula, what do you expect of me?" he asked, his voice more serious than usual. Paula swallowed. "I'm hoping for your advice. I feel there's a hidden injustice. The hospital I believed in so much seems to have skeletons in its closet. I've seen how they prioritize profit over real needs, how they suppress information. I want you to tell me if I should investigate more, if I should try to shed light on the truth. You admire medicine as much as I do. Shouldn't we fight for its integrity?" The retired surgeon averted his eyes to the window. The dark street outside, the dining room lamp inside, formed a painful contrast. After a few seconds, he looked at his daughter. "Medicine, Paula, is a delicate field. The prestige that takes years to build can be lost in an instant. San Hilario, with all its flaws, is an important institution. Getting involved in shady past matters, stirring up stories no one wants to remember, could ruin your career before it even starts. Is it worth exposing yourself like that?" Paula felt deflated. She had expected understanding, encouragement, an ethical push. Instead, her father urged caution. "Dad, I believed that if something is wrong, we must fix it. Isn't that the essence of medicine? To heal not only bodies but also the system that cares for them?" Dr. Smith sighed. "I understand your indignation, daughter. I too, years ago, faced grey areas. But reality is more complicated than theory. Sometimes, keeping the balance is more important than diving into impossible quests. Think of your future. This hospital could give you opportunities. Don't sacrifice them for ghosts of the past." His words pierced Paula like icy needles. She expected support and found discouragement. She wanted a partner in her search for truth and found fear. She felt a mixture of sadness and rebellion. The heroic figure she held of her father cracked a bit. He, the admired surgeon, now seemed like a frightened man, more interested in preserving his legacy intact than denouncing past injustices. Dinner passed in uncomfortable silence. As they said goodbye, Paula noticed her father avoided her gaze. Perhaps he felt guilty too. On the taxi ride back to the hospital at night, Paula replayed her father's words. Why was he so afraid of stirring up the past? Could it really be so dangerous? That confirmed that the roots of the Scott case ran deep, involving figures no one wished to expose. In the small hotel room she was renting temporarily, before going to bed, Paula recalled the names Anna had mentioned. Guzman, the green door, the hints about Scott. A chorus of unanswered questions danced in her mind. Her father, who should have been a beacon, offered her only darkness. So the decision was hers: remain silent or move forward. She felt alone at that crossroads, yet her solitude gave her strength. She understood that if everyone stayed silent out of fear or convenience, no one would achieve justice. She had her youth, her intact vocation, and her moral conviction. Even if it went against her family's wishes, even if it earned her resentment, she preferred to stay true to her principles. Before sleeping, Paula inhaled deeply and promised herself she would press on. Scott's past wasn't a ghost. It was a bleeding wound in the hospital that needed attention. If her own father, a role model to her, refused to help, she would have to be her own guide. In medicine, truth didn't always heal, but lies always destroyed. Determined, Paula chose the harder path: honesty, the tireless search for answers. And she would do it alone if no one supported her. Anna felt like an explorer in forbidden territory. After years of a stable, uneventful routine, she was now digging into the past with trembling hands. She had taken a few minutes off her break to go through old notes scribbled in dusty notepads stored in a locker room drawer for years. They were contacts from a time when the hospital's staff was different and the halls resonated with other names. There she found references to Dr. Guzman, an old-school surgeon who left the hospital shortly after Scott's scandal. Why had he retired so abruptly? Several calls led nowhere, disconnected numbers, addresses changed, relatives who knew nothing. But with patience, Anna managed to talk to a neighbor who remembered Guzman. The woman, surprised that someone would look for him after so many years, gave her an address on the outskirts of the city. It was a humble neighborhood, nothing ostentatious. It was curious that a once prestigious doctor had ended up there. Anna wrote down the address in her notebook, planning to visit as soon as possible. Maybe she wouldn't get answers, but at least she could try to understand why this man had vanished from the radar. At the hospital, the atmosphere remained tense. The unknown old man hovered in a precarious balance, stable, but not improving. While changing his bandages, Anna noticed a faded tattoo on his shoulder. It was hard to discern its shape, maybe a marine symbol, an anchor, or a stylized fish. Could this be the clue she needed to discover his identity? Each detail about the man seemed to tell a story she didn't understand. She spoke to him softly, almost whispering, though he couldn't respond. "Who are you? What's your connection to Scott? Why did you appear like this, right now?" As so many times in her career, Anna realized that silence was the only answer. She remembered Scott's kind voice, the doctor who inspired her when she was a novice nurse. He taught with patience, without humiliating anyone, believing that medicine was, above all, a humanitarian act. What came afterward, his disgrace, his inexplicable departure, was a moral blow to many. Now, with these events, Anna wondered if he had been a scapegoat for something bigger. Or had he truly committed an unforgivable error? Paula, meanwhile, followed her own path. She had managed to enter the hospital's digital archive, navigating through old passwords and dusty directories. She typed Guzman into the search and got scant mentions. He had participated in a series of complex surgeries more than 2 decades ago, played a key role in some technical improvements. Then his trail vanished. Without an official reason, Dr. Guzman left the hospital right after the Scott scandal. No farewell letter, no tribute, only a silence that grew over the years. What had Guzman seen? What had he known to make that decision? Paula jotted the details down in her notebook. Now she had 2 key figures in this drama, Scott and Guzman. One discredited, the other disappeared. Her intuition told her that Guzman might be the link connecting the pieces, the witness who could clarify whether Scott was guilty or an involuntary martyr. The San Hilario environment crackled with an invisible electricity. Anna noticed that the most veteran nurses lowered their gaze when she mentioned the old days. Some senior doctors looked tense, avoiding discussions about the time when Scott was a central figure. It felt as if the entire hospital knew, to some extent, that there was a dirty chapter in its past, an event never resolved. How many were willing to talk? Probably very few. That tension manifested in subtle gestures, a sigh upon passing a certain corridor, awkward silence when uttering the surname Scott, warning looks when Paula or Anna hinted at revisiting the topic. As if an infected wound festered in the hospital's heart, giving off an odor everyone preferred to ignore. A problem never confronted, wrapped in layers of secrets and conveniences. Anna wondered what role Guzman would play now. Would he have the courage to remember, to speak out? Or had time and shame sealed his lips? The nurse knew she couldn't force him, but if he had truly been a close colleague of Scott, if he admired or knew him well, perhaps he couldn't live forever with the weight of silence. Anna hoped that when she approached him, reminding him of old times and her desire to restore the truth, some light might emerge. Meanwhile, Paula, unaware of Anna's plans, persisted in her investigation. Her conversation with her father had made it clear that the roots of this case ran deep. The more she dug, the more she confirmed that the story never ended properly. Scott vanished, Guzman left, and the hospital carried on as if nothing had happened, but the stain never faded. Now, with the dying old man involved, the sore was reopening. Afternoon fell over San Hilario. Pale light filtered through the windows, painting the corridors in orange hues. Anna, with Guzman's address noted in her notebook, took a deep breath. She felt a turning point approaching. The past wasn't dead, it had just been on pause. Now it demanded justice, clarity, a proper resolution. Could Dr. Guzman help heal the hospital's festering wound? Anna didn't know, but she was willing to try. This was no longer just an isolated case, but about clearing the name of an unjustly condemned mentor and allowing San Hilario to stop dragging around a shameful secret. The unresolved past clamored for a cure, and she, alongside Paula, prepared to open the door to the truth. The crisis in pediatrics had worsened at an alarming rate. Dr. Johnson strode down the hallway with quick steps, trying to appear calm before the mothers waiting for news. Behind closed doors, several children struggled with high fevers, persistent coughs, and unexpected complications. It seemed that the hospital-acquired infection, once a distant rumor, had solidified into a real and lethal threat. The atmosphere was thick with anguish. The entire hospital seemed to be holding its breath. Johnson, exhausted, dared to confront Salazar with clear, overwhelming figures. She asked for new rounds of stronger antibiotics, more staff to isolate the infected, and consultations with external specialists who could offer solutions. But Salazar, leaning on the frame of his office door, listened with a furrowed brow. Beside him, Jenna Davis stood with arms crossed, her gaze assessing the financial and media impact of every decision. "Dr. Johnson, we understand your concern," said Jenna with a controlled voice. "But bringing in external specialists involves additional costs, and for now, the board has not approved any budget increases in that area." Johnson had to contain her fury. How could they haggle over the lives of sick children? Was the hospital's image more important than immediate solutions? Dr. Salazar intervened with a paternalistic tone. "We must be cautious. Increasing expenses now without guaranteed results could damage San Hilario's reputation. Let's try adjusting internal protocols first." The doctor left the office with her hands clenched into fists. She had sounded the alarm in time, but the administration preferred to protect appearances. Outside, some nurses avoided her gaze, uncomfortable, knowing Johnson was desperate. She had dedicated her career to children, their care and well-being. Feeling that the hospital denied her the necessary tools churned inside her. Paula, in her free time, went to Pediatrics. She couldn't ignore that reality. Upon entering, the atmosphere struck her face. The smell of disinfectant mixed with anxiety, lined up beds, children with IVs and masks. Tired mothers, with pronounced dark circles, whispered anxious pleas, wondering how much longer they'd have to wait. A girl of about 5, with messy hair and a hot forehead, looked at Paula with glassy eyes, as if searching in her for an answer that the adults seemed not to have. Paula approached Johnson, who greeted her with a sigh of relief. Despite her youth, Paula showed determination and empathy. The doctor lowered her voice. "The infection is spreading, Paula. Some children aren't responding to standard antibiotics. We need more aggressive measures, more complex culture studies. This can't wait." The young doctor felt a lump in her throat. The Scott drama, the unknown old man, and the hidden past receded into the background as she watched those children fighting for their health. But she understood they weren't isolated issues. The same culture of secrecy and political calculation that ruined Scott now blocked a rapid response in pediatrics. If the hospital had learned to remain silent and hide things before, how could anyone expect it to act with transparency and solidarity now? At the end of the hallway, Anna learned about the situation. She had been so focused on finding the truth about Scott, on tracking down Guzman, that she had neglected the urgent problems of the present. She felt guilty, as if her obsession with the past had blinded her to the immediate suffering. But she also understood the connection. The old mismanagement and cover-ups had created a culture where appearances outweighed substance. And today, that culture prevented Johnson from receiving the help she needed. Paula, seeing Anna approach, exchanged a knowing look with her. They needed no words to understand that if they didn't act, those children would pay the price. Anna nodded slowly, sensing that her investigations, far from being a hobby about the past, were part of the same puzzle. If unmasking the lies of history could soften the hospital's culture, maybe that would open the door to honest solutions for pediatrics. With a trembling voice, Johnson confided her fears to Paula. "If we don't get help soon, some children may worsen irreversibly. We need specific treatments, proper isolation, new equipment. Good intentions aren't enough." Paula's anger grew. It wasn't just a historical or moral matter, it involved innocent lives. The courage she had intended to use to uncover the Scott case was now also needed to sound the alarm in the present. She would have to apply pressure, join forces with Anna, Mario, who knew about the administrative maneuvers, and whoever else was necessary, so the leadership would stop putting off the inevitable. The hospital creaked like a ship in the midst of a storm. There were tensions everywhere, financial, legal, media-related. But to Paula's eyes, nothing could be more important than these children. Truth mattered, yes, both past and present. Without it, injustice persisted, victims multiplied, and lies took root. If lying once harmed the memory of an exemplary doctor, now those same cowardly practices could cost fragile, real lives. With her resolve ignited, Paula decided to act. She wouldn't only seek justice for Scott, she would also shout from the rooftops about what was happening in pediatrics if necessary. Righteousness was not a comfortable option, but the only way to change things. Anna, beside her, looked at her with respect. She knew the young doctor had taken a decisive step. It was no longer just about unearthing the past, but about saving the present from the negligent hands steering San Hilario's course. Night had fallen over San Hilario Hospital, but inside, the cold neon lights still marked the relentless rhythm of gurneys, nurses, doctors, and patients. Far from the busy areas, Anna and Paula stood in a secluded corner, facing a metal door that led to a little frequented basement. According to an old map, whispered rumors, and their own intuition, this lower level held, it was said, old, obsolete medical records, dusty reports the hospital no longer consulted. Anna, holding a flashlight, opened the door, which groaned on its rusty hinges. Paula covered her mouth as she caught the scent of damp and moldy paper. They descended a narrow staircase and found themselves in a wide space lit only by a weak bulb hanging from the ceiling. The shelves, made of rusted metal, were crammed with yellowed folders. It resembled a ghostly library, where each document might be a piece of the puzzle they were trying to assemble. "This is it," Anna murmured, trying not to raise her voice. The immense stillness of the place called for caution. Paula could not help a shiver. While the hospital bustled with life above, down here time seemed frozen. Could this be where the truth about Scott, Guzman, or that carefully concealed medical error lay hidden? They split up to cover more ground. With their flashlights, they searched the spines of folders, scanning faded labels and old doctors' names who had long since left. Paula found records of surgeries from 25 years ago, precisely Scott's era. Excited, she pulled out a worm-eaten folder, blew off the dust, and examined its contents. Partial reports, names crossed out, missing pages. Her heart jumped. Someone had gone to great lengths to make certain data vanish. Anna, for her part, leafed through documents with trembling hands. With each passing minute, her conviction that the past had been manipulated grew. The official story of Scott was well known. A fatal error in a crucial surgery, a shameful expulsion, and his subsequent disappearance. But here, there was no solid file, no indisputable proof. Only gaps, silences, as if the hospital had preferred a quick scapegoat over an honest investigation. The heavy basement air closed in around them. The distant hum of a subterranean pipe and the crackle of dry paper under their fingers were the only sounds. Neither dared break the silence with unnecessary words. Suddenly, a low, urgent voice startled them. It was Mario, the orderly, creeping down the stairs. His face reflected unease. "Anna, Paula," he whispered. "People from administration have come. Jenna and Salazar are on edge. They don't want anyone digging into the past. I've seen them lurking around these halls." Paula shone her flashlight on Mario, illuminating his tense face. "How do you know this?" "My colleagues told me. Besides, Jenna hinted—" Mario hesitated, unable to meet Anna's eyes. "They offered me money if I didn't help you. My mother needs an expensive operation, you understand? It's a lot of money." Anna felt a stab of sympathy. She understood Mario's moral quandary. Without judging him, she took his hand. "Mario, I know it's hard, but trust us. Doing what's right will be worth it. This hospital deserves the truth. You don't deserve to sell your conscience." Mario lowered his gaze, ashamed. He knew he stood in the eye of the storm, trying to balance his personal needs with the morality Anna represented. At last, he nodded weakly, without further words. Just then, Paula aimed her flashlight toward the back of the corridor. There, half hidden behind a shelf, she spotted a green-painted metal door secured by a simple padlock. "The green door," she whispered, recalling the old man's delirious words. Perhaps behind it lay the most incriminating records. But they had neither the key nor the time to force it tonight. At least now they knew it was real. The discovery filled Anna with hope and fear. They were closer to the truth, but each step revealed new barriers. Salazar and Jenna's presence nearby, the bribe to Mario, the incomplete documents, all indicated that the path to clarity was lined with obstacles. Before leaving, Paula checked one last folder. Nothing useful, only meaningless fragments. Anna understood that their excavation of the past had barely begun. Now they had a solid lead, the green door. The metaphor was now a tangible reality. If they could open it, they might find the key evidence to clear Scott's name, or at least a testimony that could overturn the official story. After saying goodbye to Mario, Anna and Paula climbed the stairs. Outside, in the hospital's continuous hustle, no one suspected that two women and an orderly fought a silent battle for San Hilario's lost dignity. Neither the bustle of gurneys nor the distant murmur of patients disturbed the bubble of secrets and lies they struggled to expose. Reaching the main corridor, Anna took a deep breath. Every step, every folder examined, and every difficult moral decision brought them closer to the truth. For now, they returned to the surface almost empty-handed, but the knowledge gained was valuable. They knew the green door existed, that someone feared its contents, and that past corruption still wielded power over the present. Anna felt that despite the uncertainty, their descent into the basement marked a turning point. Perhaps soon they would find the missing pieces to restore Scott's memory and begin to heal the open wounds in San Hilario's heart. Tension seemed thicker than ever at San Hilario Hospital. After the recent foray into the basement, Mario's conscience was a battlefield. He moved nervously through the corridors, eyes downcast, as though afraid every colleague, every nurse, every doctor could read his internal dilemmas. In his pocket, he carried a photo of his mother, smiling weakly in a bygone era. She needed an expensive, urgent operation, and he, her only support, had to choose between morality and solvency. The promise of money from Rodolfo Vargas still echoed in his mind. Mario stopped by a water dispenser and took a sip, trying to think clearly. Was it worth complicating his life for Anna and Paula's investigations? They chased an ideal, the truth about Scott and the hospital's moral cleansing. But his mother was real, she was ill, and Vargas's money could save her. Paula watched him from a distance. She felt empathy for his conflict. In recent days, she had realized Mario was not a bad man, just trapped in life's snares. She approached him, her voice soft, trying to convey trust. "Mario, I understand what you're going through. There are things more important than money. Truth, justice." Mario cut her off with a heavy sigh. "Justice?" he repeated, almost incredulous. "What if we never find proof? What if nothing changes in the end? My mother will still lack her operation, and I will have passed up a chance to save her." Paula didn't know what to say immediately. The world wasn't perfect. They could fail. But if they never fought, silence would continue to reign, harming the innocent here and now, like the children in Pediatrics, and perpetuating the injustices of the past. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "I can't promise success, Mario, but I know that without your help, without your honesty, it will be harder. Anna and I need someone who knows the halls, the access points, how to reach that green door." Mario lowered his gaze. The green door was his key to unlocking the hospital's mystery, a place that might hold Scott's clean record, the piece that would demolish the official version. Meanwhile, Anna watched Mario's restlessness from afar. She understood his dilemma. After changing shifts, she approached him calmly, without pressuring. She had learned over the years that empathy was more effective than force. Speaking softly, she said, "Mario, I know it's not easy. Think about what you want for your life. Could you sleep soundly knowing you let lies triumph over money? I imagine your mother, if she understood the situation, would want you to act with dignity." The mention of his mother struck him at his core. She was devoted to honesty, intolerant of deceit. Of course, in her position, maybe she would prefer any means to pay for the operation. Mario stood at a moral crossroads with no simple way out. When the sun had nearly set, Vargas appeared like a shadow in the parking lot. Someone so comfortable in darkness knew how to pick his moments. It was lightly raining, and the lamplight cast long reflections on the wet asphalt. Vargas approached Mario with an impassive face. "Well, have you thought about my offer?" he asked in a low voice, almost purring. Mario felt a lump in his throat. His hands trembled in his pockets. "I'm still not sure," he admitted weakly. Vargas clicked his tongue, annoyed. "You don't have infinite time. Either you give me whatever information Anna and Paula discover, or you can forget the help for your mother. The hospital won't tolerate rebels snooping into matters that don't concern them." Without waiting for an answer, Vargas walked away. Mario remained there under the light rain, feeling miserable. He was no hero, nor a villain, just a man under pressure. That evening, inside the hospital, Anna paused outside the unknown old man's room. He kept fighting for his life. She knew then that the decisive moment was approaching. Soon they would need to enter the area guarded by the green door. Without Mario, it would be complicated. The nurse ran her fingertips along the doorframe, saddened. How many lives and reputations hung in the balance on this chessboard? Scott's, the old man's, the children in Pediatrics, Mario and his mother. Paula joined Anna. She patted her colleague on the shoulder. The moral tension intensified with the coming night. The young doctor understood that without Mario, things would be harder. He knew the access routes, how to slip past security. His testimony might be crucial if they needed to expose the truth. But they could not force him. They had to appeal to his conscience. Before heading home, Mario stopped in an empty room, looking at his mother's photo. What to choose? Corruption offered financial salvation, honesty an uncertain but honorable path. Paula's voice echoed in his mind, recalling the importance of doing what was right. Anna's words, full of understanding, also lingered. He could choose the price of silence or the value of truth. That night, the hospital slept fitfully. Its staff rotated through shifts, emergencies were attended in silence, monitors beeped at regular intervals. Mario, on the threshold of dawn, still carried the weight of his decision on his shoulders. The new day would bring more pressure, and he had to be prepared. Doing the right thing or yielding to the bribe, the choice would define his future and perhaps everyone's fate. Rain fell insistently over a humble neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. The peeling facades, puddle-filled asphalt, and lack of lighting stood in brutal contrast to the pristine shine of San Hilario Hospital. Under a small umbrella that barely protected them from the cold raindrops, Anna and Paula made their way down a narrow sidewalk. They had obtained a short leave from work, citing personal matters, and now they were about to delve into a dark chapter of the past. They arrived at a home with a tin roof, unplastered walls, and a wooden door swollen by dampness. Before knocking, they exchanged nervous glances. Dr. Guzman, according to the information they had worked so hard to obtain, lived here, withdrawn from the world he once knew. Anna's heart pounded. Years ago, Guzman and Scott had been colleagues. Perhaps he could shed light on the truth. After the third knock, the door opened a crack. A stooped man with white hair and tired eyes examined them suspiciously. When Anna mentioned Scott's name, Guzman frowned, hesitant. Finally, after a tense few seconds, he relented. "Come in, but don't stay long." The living room was dark and cramped. An old sofa, a small coffee table, and a TV with a crooked antenna made up the furnishings. The smell of dampness mingled with the bitter aroma of tea that Guzman prepared in a tiny adjacent kitchen. The women sat together, holding the retired doctor's gaze as he placed the cups in front of them with trembling hands. The atmosphere was tense, burdened by uncomfortable silences. Guzman refused to speak openly, as though each word might betray the shadows that had settled in his memory. Finally, Paula, her voice low and firm, broke the ice. "Doctor, we need to know the truth about Scott. Was he really guilty of that medical error?" The question lingered in the air. Guzman narrowed his eyes, as if weighing whether it was worth reawakening old pain. Anna seized the moment to mention her own memory of Scott. A good, just mentor, deeply committed to his work. Something in that description seemed to soften the old man's armor. With a deep sigh, he lowered his head. Scott was innocent, he admitted grudgingly. 25 years ago, there was an incident with an influential patient. Enormous external pressures came into play. A young, ambitious doctor manipulated results and shifted blame. Scott, noble to a fault, preferred to take responsibility to protect someone, maybe an innocent caught in the scandal. His silence prevented an even greater uproar. Anna felt a chill run down her spine. Her mentor had been an involuntary martyr, sacrificing his reputation for the greater good. Now everything made sense. The lies, the erasing of his name, the tension in the hospital. Paula, her voice trembling, then asked about the green door, the one the old man in the hospital had whispered about and that they had glimpsed in the basement. Guzman nodded slowly, as if it pained him to move his head. The green door. That's where they stored files that were never meant to see the light of day. Among them, there's a report signed by a nurse, now deceased, a woman of integrity who documented what really happened. That report would exonerate Scott beyond any doubt. But be careful. Powerful forces protect that lie. If you find it, you'll be in danger. Silence fell over them once again. Anna noticed her hands trembling. So the truth did exist, archived in some dark place, shackled by unspoken interests. Paula's heart hammered. If they recovered that document, they wouldn't just do justice to Scott, they would also lay bare the rot of the past. But Guzman warned them, it wouldn't be easy or safe. Who was this ambitious doctor? Paula ventured cautiously. The old man shook his head, refusing to give names. Maybe he feared retaliation, or perhaps he believed they needed to discover it on their own. All I'll say is that powerful people could crush you if you're careless. Be careful. Scott has already paid a very high price. Under the murmur of rain pounding on the tin roof, Anna and Paula understood that they had to proceed with both caution and cunning. They had gained invaluable confirmation. Scott was innocent. There was a report proving it, and the green door was the key. But they also had to heed Guzman's warning. Powerful forces wanted to keep this deceit concealed. If they exposed everything too suddenly, the evidence might be destroyed, or even more innocents could be harmed. Before leaving, Anna thanked him with tears in her eyes. Guzman looked away, ashamed, perhaps feeling guilty for having remained silent for so many years. Paula understood. Everyone had their own reasons and fears. What mattered now was that they knew they weren't chasing a ghost. They stepped outside, the rain still falling. Under that tiny umbrella, both women felt the cold water washing away a bit of their nervousness. They had a clear objective: reach that green door and rescue the exonerating report. That would change Scott's story and, with luck, bring fresh air into San Hilario, so desperately in need of honesty. As they returned, Anna and Paula pondered Guzman's warning. They would have to move stealthily, protect Mario from pressure, face Salazar's and Jenna's resistance, and deal with their corrupt collaborators. But at least they were no longer blindly groping in the dark. They knew the truth was out there, waiting to be reclaimed. And that certainty, however small, was a beacon in the gloom that shrouded the hospital's past. The return to San Hilario after the meeting with Guzman was marked by dense silence, laden with repressed emotion. Anna and Paula entered through the main doors with hearts still racing, still absorbing the revelation. Scott was not only innocent, he was a martyr who bore someone else's guilt to protect another. Now they knew that behind that sacrifice lay a web of pressures and interests, and their main suspect was Dr. Salazar, now perched atop the medical hierarchy. Paula, who until recently had admired Salazar for his administrative skill, shuddered at the thought that he could have been the ambitious doctor who pulled the strings in the old scandal. How to face this moral abyss? How to look at him now, knowing he might have been the true culprit behind the error that destroyed Scott's reputation? The idea unsettled her. All of the hospital's prestige, the stability and image Salazar fought for every day, might rest on rotten foundations. In an empty break room, far from prying eyes, Anna leaned against the wall, her gaze drifting into the past. She remembered Scott with painful clarity, his gentle voice when explaining a patient's complications to a young nurse, his firm yet unarrogant hands in the operating room, his way of greeting every staff member with respect. He taught her to listen not only to symptoms, but also to the hidden stories behind each illness. That his career had ended in such infamy had always been an unhealed wound for Anna. Now, with the truth within reach, she knew she could no longer bow her head. She owed her mentor moral justice. While both women reflected, on the upper floors, Jenna Davis kept silent watch from her office in administration. The director knew Anna and Paula were moving pieces, digging into something that should remain in the shadows. With her tablet in hand, she discreetly monitored entrances, exits, and file order. The mere mention of Scott set her on alert. If the truth came out, her beloved hospital could sink in a monumental scandal. Jenna would not tolerate that. Thus, her loyalty lay with Salazar and preserving the status quo. In his office, blinds half drawn, Dr. Salazar seethed with displeasure. He discussed with Jenna the need to nip the problem in the bud. He had tried to discourage Paula, offering her opportunities, guiding her toward complacency. He had pushed Anna with the option of early retirement. Even Vargas was circling around, trying to buy Mario's silence. But nothing seemed to work. These women persisted, risking their careers to exhume a corpse from the past. "Has Mario done his part?" asked Salazar, narrowing his eyes. Jenna shook her head in annoyance. They had no confirmation that the orderly would cooperate. The blackmail had not yet yielded results. They needed to increase the pressure, find a weak spot. "Tell Vargas to be more convincing," Salazar growled as night unfurled outside. Elsewhere in the hospital, Mario wrestled with his conscience. Vargas's tempting offer hovered in his mind, but Anna and Paula's words, their empathy, their genuine concern, confused him. How could he betray these two brave women who only wanted justice? How could he sell his honor for money, even for such a sympathetic reason as saving his mother? The internal battle had no clear winner yet. That night, Anna stood before the unknown old man's room, the one who brought the wrinkled photo showing Scott. He continued fighting for his life, a mute witness to injustice. Anna observed his weary face. Had he come this far so the truth could finally emerge? Her hands trembled, thinking of her mentor's sacrifice. She had once been a silent witness, a nurse who never dared question anything. Now, with experience and the weight of years, she understood that indifference was also a form of complicity. Paula approached, her gaze full of determination. Seeing Anna by the old man's bedside, she felt a lump in her throat. Both knew they couldn't turn back now. They had uncovered too many clues, witnessed the nature of Scott's sacrifice and the corruption that buried him. If they remained silent now, they would become accomplices. Their careers, their peace, even their personal safety could be threatened. But medical ethics and dignity had no price. The young doctor recalled when her father asked her to be cautious. Now it seemed clear that caution was just another name for fear. And the time had come to face it. "We can't stop now," Paula whispered. "We must reveal this truth, even if it shakes the hospital's foundations." Anna nodded, her eyes shining. Scott deserved to rest with a clean name. If the hospital had to tear down the curtain of hypocrisy, then so be it. Only then could it be reborn as a more honest institution, more faithful to the Hippocratic oath. Outside, the night continued as usual. San Hilario maintained its relentless routine, patients entering and leaving, monitors beeping, doctors on call. But in that corner, beside the bed of a nameless old man, two women understood that their mission surpassed any personal interest. The revelation of Scott's sacrifice demanded action, courage, and perhaps the willingness to risk everything for the truth. The situation in pediatrics had reached a critical point. Dr. Johnson, with dark circles under her eyes and a deep frown, moved along the corridor between beds occupied by children with high fevers and persistent coughs. Some of the little ones had pulmonary complications that did not respond to standard treatments. The smell of disinfectant and the anguished murmurs of mothers formed a muffled chorus of distress. Paula spent her free hours helping, adjusting IVs, checking vital signs, trying to coax a smile from frightened children. And as she bent over those feverish faces, she thought of the hospital as a living organism, a being that, like a sick body, hid its symptoms to avoid admitting weakness. This crisis was not an isolated incident. It was a mirror reflecting the same policies and attitudes that, decades ago, had dragged Scott into ignominy. Johnson's tense voice echoed in Salazar's office, where he demanded that the problem be minimized. "We can't alarm the press or the donors," the head of medicine growled. "Do whatever is necessary, but I don't want headlines about an uncontrolled hospital-acquired infection." Jenna Davis, flustered, manipulated data, trimmed statistics, searched for euphemisms and formulas to dilute the severity. A slight upward trend in febrile cases was the soft term she dared to use. ignoring that something far more serious was happening. Paula watched this cover-up with dismay. The hospital, once admired, now behaved like an image factory that cared more about numbers than the children's lives. She now understood, with total clarity, the connection between past and present. If the truth about Scott had never been revealed, why would the hospital have learned any lesson? The same mindset that cornered him back then, hiding errors beneath lies, repeated itself now, condemning children to inadequate care and honest doctors to feeling like involuntary accomplices. Paula realized that exposing past corruption was the only way to halt the current one. Meanwhile, Nathan Ortega, the journalist, wandered through the hospital cafeteria looking distracted, but his eyes were always alert. After his previous visit, he had caught a whiff of rot in the corridors. Now he tried to extract information from young nurses, glanced at bulletin boards, and listened in on half-heard conversations. Some dodged his questions, fearing repercussions. Others stammered rumors without daring to be specific. Anna, busy with her tasks, passed by without wanting to involve herself with the press yet. She knew the moment to unleash a scandal had not come. But Paula, on an impulse, approached Nathan when she saw him drinking coffee alone, looking out the window. "There are problems in pediatrics," she said quietly, barely moving from her spot. "I can't give details, but there are complicated cases, and the hospital isn't responding with the transparency it should." Nathan looked up, interested. "Are you saying information is being concealed?" Paula bit her lip, aware she was lighting a fuse. "Let's just say, this isn't the San Hilario you imagine. There's more than one buried shame here. Stay alert." Without another word, she moved away, leaving the journalist with the suspicion that the infection in pediatrics was just the tip of an iceberg. Elsewhere in the hospital, Mario dragged his feet down a half-empty corridor. He had caught sight of Vargas out of the corner of his eye, spying on him, waiting for a signal. He knew he needed to respond soon to the bribe offer. Every minute of hesitation could be taken as a refusal. Mario passed near a room where a mother was crying silently over her child's persistent high fever. That quiet weeping shook him to the core. How could he sell his morals for money while children suffered because the hospital preferred to lie? The temptation was great, and his mother's need had not vanished. But the internal pressure grew, and Anna and Paula had been kind, understanding, honorable. To betray them would be to trample the hope of cleaning up this institution. Mario stood at the edge of a moral abyss, forced to choose between what was right and what was convenient. Anguish consumed him. Internal tensions grew on all fronts. Salazar and Jenna trying to control the narrative, Paula and Anna more determined than ever to find the report that would exonerate Scott, Johnson fighting for the children's health, Nathan Ortega smelling a scandal, and Mario caught in a cruel dilemma. All were approaching a breaking point, a moment when lies and truth would inevitably collide. Paula, sitting on a hallway bench, closed her eyes for an instant. She knew that if they did not expose the past corruption, they would never stop the present. That if they let the pediatric infection remain hidden, they themselves would become accomplices of the same silence that ruined Scott. Anna, elsewhere, thought the same. Time was running out, tension was mounting, and soon they would have to act. There was no easy path. There was honor or complicit silence. On the horizon loomed the final battle for truth, and each person felt the pressure in their heart. Outside, the day waned. Inside the hospital, the air seemed electric, laden with secrets about to explode. The afternoon, grey and dull, found Paula standing before her father's house, Dr. Federico Smith's home. She had come to dine, hoping to find a haven, paternal advice that would restore the clarity she so desperately needed. But as she crossed the threshold and sensed the familiar scent of polished wood, she noticed a tension in the air, as if her father already knew the conversation would not be pleasant. The dining room, sober and orderly, welcomed her with its usual superficial warmth. Dr. Smith sat on the opposite side of the table, napkins neatly folded, glasses gleaming, waiting for wine. Paula felt a knot in her throat. In this familiar setting, she sought the figure of the upright physician who inspired her calling, but what she found was a tired man whose eyes avoided hers. After a few minutes of forced small talk, Paula was direct. "Dad, do you remember Dr. Scott? I've been investigating, and I believe he was unjustly accused. There's a whole story of lies behind it." Dr. Smith took his wine glass, turned it between his fingers before replying. "Daughter, medicine is a profession of balances," he said in a dull voice. "Sometimes we cannot change things. Scott, that was so long ago. Why stir it up now?" The answer chilled Paula. She had hoped for a word of encouragement. Do what's right. Fight for the truth. Instead, she got apathy, resignation. A dull anger pulsed in her temples. Balances? Leave things as they are, even knowing that a good man was wronged? Is that what you think I should do? Dr. Smith looked away toward a painting on the wall, as if avoiding a pointless debate. Medicine is complicated. There are interests, careers at stake, reputations. Sometimes it's better not to kick up the dust. Scott, well, nothing can be done for him now. At what price reopen that wound? Paula's indignation turned into contained fury. Her father, once her hero, now seemed like a passive accomplice to injustice. "Did you know something?" she asked, voice trembling. "Did you know Scott was a scapegoat and did nothing?" Silence confirmed the worst. Perhaps her father was not the architect of the lie, but he knew more than he admitted. Out of cowardice, out of comfort, he had kept silent. Paula felt nauseated. She left the house almost running without saying goodbye. Dr. Smith remained there, motionless, aware that this rift was final. Back at the hospital, Paula walked through the corridors with her head down, her eyes shining with rage and disappointment. Anna found her near the nurse's station, crouched beside a cabinet, holding back tears. "What happened?" Anna whispered, placing a hand on her shoulder. Paula took a deep breath and told her what had happened with her father. Cowardice disguised as prudence, the message of "don't get involved." Anna listened without interrupting. She understood that pain. The system was entrenched, putting prestige, silence, and political convenience above truth and justice. "You're not alone, Paula," said Anna gently. "This hospital needs brave voices. You are one." As both women supported each other, watched from afar by the hospital's ceaseless pulse, Dr. Salazar observed them with a calculating expression. He knew Paula was younger, maybe still persuadable. Anna was a veteran with firm convictions, but Paula, with her future ahead, might yield to a good offer. Seizing the tension of the moment, Salazar summoned Paula to his office. She arrived with her heart hardened by family disillusionment. The head of medicine received her with forced kindness, offering coffee, a comfortable chair, studied smiles. "Dr. Smith, I'm concerned to see you so involved in matters not your own. You have a promising future here. You could specialize, get scholarships, move up quickly. You only need to focus on your career. Don't stir the past." Paula felt disgust, as if the office smelled of cheap perfume and polished lies. "Are you offering me a moral bribe, doctor?" she asked, cold voice unwavering. Salazar tilted his head, feigning surprise. "I wouldn't call it a bribe, doctor. I'd call it an opportunity. The hospital needs loyal professionals. Let old ghosts rest in peace. Concentrate on your work." Paula feigned calm, though inside she burned. She remembered the children's faces in Pediatrics, Scott's injustice, and her own father's disappointment. She knew she could not bite this hook. "I'll think about it," she said in a neutral tone, not wanting to alert Salazar. "Thanks for your time." Upon leaving his office, Paula felt her determination solidify. Salazar's proposal repelled her. She hadn't become a physician to be a cog in a corrupt machine, but to heal, protect, and honor the truth. The opacity, the silence, the emotional blackmail, everything indicated the hospital's roots were rotten. With tears held back, Paula walked toward Pediatrics. She observed the exhausted nurses, the vulnerable children, the mothers with battered hopes. She no longer doubted. Her vocation demanded more than medical skill. She had to stand as a defender of good, despite the pressures. Anna saw her pass by and perceived a glow of rage and resolve in her eyes. She knew this trial had changed Paula forever. Paula was no longer the insecure young woman who hesitated between comfort and risk. Now she was a physician willing to confront the system for her values. Gripping the stethoscope tightly, Paula understood that her path was set. Despite family disappointment, subtle threats, and lingering sadness, she would not be an accomplice to silence. Medicine was not a game of cynical balances. It was a struggle for life and truth. The rooftop of San Hilario Hospital was a rarely frequented space, a quiet place where the distant roar of city traffic was barely a whisper, blurred by the height. The night, cooler than the interior hallways, offered a reprieve from the stale air of daily tensions. Leaning on a metal railing with peeling paint, Anna and Paula watched the horizon, the city lights dancing in the distance. They had chosen this high and isolated spot to talk without being overheard. There, above the intrigues and pressures, they could share confidences and plan their next step. Anna held a notebook filled with confusing notes, fragments of names, dates, and clues gathered thanks to Guzman. Paula, with her phone, scrolled through images taken in Pediatrics, hurried records showing beds, insufficient treatments, and the haggard faces of sick children. Though painful to contemplate, these details might serve as evidence later on. "We have to get into the closed-off area," Paula said in a low voice, as if the wind could steal her words. "The green door is the key." Guzman mentioned a report signed by a deceased nurse, a document that would exonerate Scott beyond any doubt. Anna nodded slowly. The fatigue lines on her face were deeper, but her eyes shone with determination. "Without that report, we remain in the dark. We must prove that Scott was a scapegoat. Only then can we stop this cycle of lies, corroding the hospital." They knew they needed help. Locked doors, guarded corridors, sealed archives wouldn't yield to mere willpower. They had to rely on Mario, the orderly who knew San Hilario's hidden nooks. But after Vargas's attempt to bribe him, could they count on him? As if their thoughts had summoned him, Mario appeared on the rooftop. His steps were unsure, his hands sweaty. Seeing Anna and Paula, his furrowed brow relaxed slightly. He expected reproaches, demands. Instead, he found two understanding gazes. Anna spoke first, softly. "Mario, we understand your situation. Your mother is ill, and Vargas's money would be an easy solution. But you know that money comes at a huge moral cost. The hospital you once respected is now crawling behind lies and abuses. Without your help, it will be harder to clean it up." Paula stepped forward, hands clasped in front of her chest. "Your mother's life is precious, Mario. No one denies that. But the truth is precious too. We don't want you to choose one over the other. We want to find another solution. If we expose the lies, if we act with evidence, we might draw the attention of people willing to help with resources. Sometimes, the light brought by truth can inspire solidarity. Plus, we can seek external support, foundations, medical organizations that help patients without resources." Mario swallowed hard. He had expected condemnation, but was met with empathy. In a trembling voice, he admitted the bribe Vargas had offered. Anna placed a hand on his shoulder without reproach, only understanding. That gesture sparked something inside him. "I don't know if I can live with the guilt of selling you out," he finally said, voice cracking. "You believe in something bigger than convenience. I'm not a hero, just an orderly with problems, but I don't want to be the guy who betrayed the last shred of honesty here." Moved by the honesty on both sides, Mario took a deep breath and nodded. "Count me in. I know corridors, keys, and schedules. We can go at night when security is laxer. The green door will be there, waiting. But we must be careful. If they catch us, It's over for all of us. Their union was fragile but real. Anna risked the reputation built over decades of service. Paula risked her budding career and name in the medical world. Mario risked his stability and the easy path to help his mother. But together they trusted that by combining virtues and resources, they would be stronger than the lies embedded in San Hilario. While they decided on details, Paula discreetly checked her phone. She had been compiling evidence, photos from Pediatrics, comments from exhausted nurses, short videos showing crowded wards, anxious expressions. Nothing too explicit that management could easily pin on her, but enough to highlight inconsistencies if the administration ever denied the seriousness of the situation. It wasn't just the past at stake, but also the immediate present. The children needed honest intervention, not mirages or cosmetic tweaks to the stats. Anna, calmer, glanced at the sky. The stars timidly emerged behind the clouds. She felt a strange vertigo. They were on the rooftop, but it was like peering into a moral abyss. At least she wasn't alone. Paula and Mario accompanied her in this risky endeavor. "It's settled then," Paula said, closing her mental notebook. "We'll wait for night. You let me know when the guard changes, and we head for the restricted section. We'll try to open the green door, find the report, and get out unseen. After that, we'll figure out how to proceed." Anna and Mario nodded. The night would cloak them, providing the cover they needed. With luck, in a few hours, they would hold the evidence that could change history, clearing Scott's name and exposing San Hilario's hypocrisy. As they descended from the rooftop, each felt the weight of their role in the plan. Anna would bring her experience, Paula her boldness, Mario his knowledge of the premises. A secret alliance forged in a high, silent place. Back in the artificially lit corridors, they returned to their daily roles: the veteran nurse, the young doctor, the kindly orderly. But they knew that, beneath appearances, a team had formed, determined to unearth the truth. That unity was their most powerful weapon. Night had fallen firmly over San Hilario Hospital, cloaking its walls in expectant silence. Inside, the neon lights flickered stubbornly, and the smell of disinfectant seemed sharper than ever. This was the time Anna, Paula, and Mario had chosen to execute their plan. Each carried a small flashlight and a heart beating out of sync. They knew the risk was immense, but the hospital's moral future depended on their courage. Mario, holding a bunch of keys he barely remembered using, led the group down an almost deserted corridor. Unlike the busy areas, this hallway lacked signs, and the echo of their footsteps seemed louder. Dim lights barely illuminated the peeling walls. At the end, the green door stood like a ghost, a threshold to a carefully concealed past. Anna and Paula regarded it with respect and fear. Inside lay the truth Guzman had promised them. "Are you sure this is the right key?" Paula whispered, trying not to raise her voice. Mario nodded silently, his hands sweating, struggling to fit the key. After a brief struggle, a dull click announced success. With utmost care, they opened the door. A smell of damp paper and stagnant time enveloped them. Their flashlights revealed a storage area packed with boxes and dusty files. A swarm of yellowed records lay on rusty metal shelves. It looked like a necropolis of forgotten stories. Shadows danced on the walls with every movement of their beams. Anna, throat dry, went in first. Paula followed, phone in hand, ready to photograph any find. Mario closed the door behind them, trying not to make noise. Time was against them. They could be discovered at any moment. They began rifling through boxes, opening folders, blowing off dust, reading titles by shaky light. They needed to find the file Guzman had mentioned, one linked to the patient who died decades ago, the case that led to Scott's downfall. Every creak of the wooden floor, every rustle of paper, quickened their pulses. The tension was palpable. "Here," Paula whispered in a thin voice. She had found a folder bearing the deceased patient's surname, the key name of the case. Without wasting time, she opened it and carefully turned the pages. There, amid reports battered by humidity, she found notes signed by the now deceased nurse, a courageous woman who documented what really happened. The description was clear and forceful. It wasn't Scott who committed the fatal error, but another doctor who manipulated events and pinned the blame on him. Anna leaned in to read over Paula's shoulder, her heart stopping when she indirectly recognized Dr. Salazar's involvement. Tears threatened to emerge as she remembered how noble Scott had been and how her mentor paid the price for a lie. Their victory was brief. A sudden noise behind them raised alarm. A dark figure stood silhouetted against the corridor's dim light. Rodolfo Vargas, who had followed them in silence, waiting for the right moment to snatch the evidence. Mario shivered. If Vargas caught them with the folder, the consequences could be dire. Vargas closed the door behind him and advanced with firm steps. "Hand over those documents," he demanded in a low, threatening voice. "You have no idea what trouble you're in." Anna clutched the folder to her chest, retreating. Paula, heart pounding, aimed her flashlight at Vargas, momentarily blinding him. Mario knew it was his turn to overcome his fears. He stepped between Vargas and the women. The official made a move to push him aside, to seize the papers by force, but Mario held his ground even as he trembled. His mother needed that operation, but betraying Anna and Paula now was unthinkable. The gloom filled with tense, struggling, labored breathing, papers falling to the floor. Paula gripped the folder tightly while Anna tried to find a gap to escape. Mario, surpassing his panic, shoved Vargas against a shelf that creaked ominously. It was a brief but decisive scuffle. With a final effort, the three broke free, running into a side corridor they had identified as a secondary exit. Vargas followed a few steps, furious, but stumbled over a toppled box, cursing under his breath. When Anna, Paula, and Mario emerged into a slightly brighter corridor, they took a deep breath. They were trembling, but they had the file in hand. The evidence clearing Scott was theirs, and with it, they had won a crucial battle. However, they had also openly declared war on the hospital's top management. Now there was no turning back. They could not feign ignorance. Outside, the night continued undisturbed, indifferent to the drama unfolding in those halls. The hospital remained silent in its routine, but in its depths, a flame of truth burned for the first time in decades, fed by the courage of three people determined to break with a past of lies. When they regrouped in a safer place, the folder secure, Anna looked at Paula and Mario and whispered, "We did it. Now we must decide how to use this truth." The internal war had just begun, and they held the proof that would change San Hilario's destiny. After their frantic escape and scuffle with Vargas, Anna, Paula, and Mario regrouped in a secluded supply room, a place with boxes of gloves, gauze, IV solutions, and medical tools, lit only by a faint bulb that flickered in the draft. There, behind a closed door, they spread out on a small metal table the documents they had rescued from behind the green door. All three held their breath as they examined the internal correspondence, the crumpled notes, the sworn statement of a deceased nurse that described precisely what happened on that fatal night, 25 years ago. Every word confirmed that Scott was not only innocent, but a silent hero, a noble physician who took on someone else's guilt to protect others, perhaps naively believing the truth would eventually come to light. And there, line by line, the name of Dr. Salazar appeared, indirectly implicated, a shadowy witness, and perhaps the mastermind of the deception that ruined a life and stained the institution. Anna closed her eyes for a few seconds, clenching her teeth. She had admired the medical vocation all her life, and Scott was the pinnacle of that virtue. Knowing he had been sacrificed by ambition and corruption filled her with anger and sadness. Paula, on the other hand, felt a surge of indignant energy mixed with determination. Now they had the evidence that legitimized their cause. Mario, beside her, breathed more easily. He had overcome the blackmail, done the right thing, and now understood the value of his choice, Meanwhile, in other parts of the hospital, Vargas, wounded in pride and frustration, alerted Jenna and Salazar. The administration panicked. If these proofs were made public, the reputation they so carefully guarded, the donations that maintained the hospital's most luxurious wings, and the political power they wielded behind the scenes would all collapse. Jenna, gripped by nervousness, called an urgent meeting with Salazar. Both knew they had to act fast. How to neutralize Anna and Paula, how to discredit them, perhaps invent a serious medical error, accuse them of negligence, manipulate records to destroy their credibility before they could speak. But it was too late. Anticipating retaliation, Anna had made quick copies of the documents. Paula, even more cautious, had taken photos with her phone, stored digital notes, and sent some fragments to a secure email account. The information could not be silenced so easily. Even if they were destroyed, the seed of truth would survive. In pediatrics, the struggle was not just moral. Dr. Johnson tried to stabilize a child with a high fever. Paula passed by and shuddered. These sick children were victims of the present, while the lies of the past repeated themselves in today's opacity. The same hands that covered up the truth about Scott now kept the pediatrics crisis in the shadows. Past injustice and current injustice joined in the same swamp of corruption and twisted priorities. Anna, for her part, felt guilty for not having suspected sooner. For years she accepted the official version, never probing the absences or contradictions. Now that she knew the truth, she painfully recalled Scott's kindly gaze and vowed to honor his memory. They had to act carefully, plan the outcome, present the case to the medical board, expose the lies, call journalist Nathan Ortega, build a shield of transparency so future generations would know the real story. Mario, on the other hand, asked for no applause, only the inner peace of knowing he had chosen the right side. Though he feared for his mother and her costly surgery, he trusted that justice would bring solutions and support from outside. After all, a hospital cleansed of corruption might attract goodwill, perhaps real donors willing to help patients in need. The hospital's darkness seemed denser that night. On one side, the old order's forces, Salazar and Jenna, struggling at all costs to protect their empire of empty prestige. On the other, the emerging honesty of Anna, Paula, and Mario, willing to pay the price for the truth. Both sides clashed without a thunderous roar, as though tragedy played out in slow motion behind the scenes, in silent corridors. Paula, looking through a window at the inner courtyard, noticed that darkness was about to yield to dawn. Each passing minute brought them closer to an irrevocable moment. They had to decide their next step carefully. Should they present the evidence directly to the board? Contact Nathan Ortega now to ensure media coverage. Seek support from other doctors. The answer wasn't simple, but the certainty was clear. There was no room for silence or hesitation. They had taken the risk by entering behind the green door, survived the confrontation with Vargas, and now possessed the most powerful weapon: documented truth. As Paula turned off her flashlight, Anna stashed the copies in a folder, and Mario kept watch by the door. All three felt that dawn would bring irrevocable consequences, a head-on collision between institutional lies and the light of honesty. And this time, they were determined that the truth would prevail. Dawn brought with it a soft grey light filtering through the windows of San Hilario Hospital. In the corridors, the staff changed shifts, and an atmosphere of tense expectation seemed to float in the air, as if the entire building sensed the imminence of a revelation. Anna and Paula had spent the night preparing, reviewing again and again the evidence that exonerated Scott. They had discreetly contacted Nathan Ortega, giving him a preview of the story so he would be ready to cover it. The journalist, eager for a good story, promised to arrive at the set hour, camera and recorder in hand. Meanwhile, Dr. Johnson approached Paula with a tired face and more pronounced dark circles. She confessed that one of the children in pediatrics was worsening, his fever rising, his lungs struggling for air. The news cut Paula like a knife. The current suffering was the direct consequence of the same policies that once sacrificed Scott. The chain of lies did not stop in the past. It continued to harm innocent lives. She realized she could wait no longer. This was the time to act. Anna, heart in her throat, took a breath before heading to the old man's room. His body was a map of scars and accumulated pains, his mind a mystery. Observing him with eyes full of compassion, Anna saw in his features the burden of a too long injustice. He still clung to life, perhaps waiting for the world to know the truth. Anna whispered silent promises. She would do whatever was necessary to clear Scott's name, to ensure that history remembered him with dignity. Each passing minute made her feel that her mentor was present through this unknown old man, an involuntary witness to the hospital's moral disaster. In the administrative area, Dr. Salazar, seized by rage, paced back and forth, crumpling papers in his hands. He was aware that something was slipping out of his control. The threatening words tossed at nurses, the indecent offers to young doctors, the veiled pressures on Mario. Nothing seemed to have worked. He knew Anna and Paula's determination and feared they had obtained the evidence. Jenna, beside him, pale and nervous, considered the possibility of an abrupt exit. Maybe resign, disappear before being exposed to public scrutiny. Vargas, the pawn who failed his mission, lingered nearby, unsure what to do, fearing the consequences of his weakness. Elsewhere, Mario walked with his head held high. He no longer stared at the floor, no longer doubted his choice. Free from moral conflict, he felt lighter, even knowing these were dangerous times. If needed, he would testify, tell how they tried to buy his silence. The truth would not only set them free, it might begin to heal San Hilario's wounds. In a staff room abandoned at this hour, Anna, Paula, and Mario huddled over the table, reviewing the documents. The sworn statement from the deceased nurse, the notes describing the pressure exerted on Scott, the indirect yet undeniable references to Salazar's presence on that fateful night. They had everything necessary. Paula had taken photos and kept digital copies. Anna preserved the originals. Mario stood ready to help spread them if something happened to them. Tension reached a point of no return. They could feel it in every corner of the hospital, a muffled tremor, like the rumble before a storm. Some nurses whispered rumors. The older doctors avoided meeting Anna's gaze, and the patients, unaware, formed the backdrop to a moral battle. Outside, Nathan Ortega awaited their signal, ready to rush to the hospital doors with his microphone and camera, eager to record the moment the institutional silence was broken. Truth hurt, Anna thought, recalling her mentor's downcast face in the past, the trampled innocence, the ruined career. Truth hurt, Paula acknowledged, thinking of her father's disappointing attitude, the cowardice that contaminated generations. Truth hurt, Mario understood, knowing his future still hung by a thread, but at least his conscience was clean. But the truth also liberated. It would free Scott's memory, free the hospital from a toxic lie, and perhaps, just perhaps, open the doors to authentic reform of the internal system. With the evidence in their hands and determination in their eyes, Anna, Paula, and Mario set out to confront the board. No more delays, no more excuses. The ghosts of the past were about to be illuminated by the sun of a new day, and they would not back down. As they walked down the hallway toward the meeting room where they intended to present the evidence to the medical board, they sensed in the atmosphere the chrysalis of change. There, in the dimness that preceded the announcement, history would take a turn. The pain of truth would be felt in every wall, but from those cracks, hope would emerge for a more honest hospital. And that was the legacy worth leaving behind. Dawn found San Hilario Hospital cloaked in a heavy air, as if its walls and corridors were holding their collective breath before a decisive battle. The lights in the lobby, dim and pale, reflected on the shiny floor, but their gleam failed to hide the growing tension. The staff changed shifts amid cautious murmurs, avoiding direct glances, as if they sensed that the apparent calm was about to shatter into 1,000 pieces. In a little used break room, Anna, Paula, and Mario met with serious expressions. They spread out before them the report proving Scott's innocence and Salazar's involvement in the old scandal. The folder seemed heavier than the paper inside, laden with the history of a moral crime about to be revealed. Paula, determined, proposed exposing the truth to the medical board, forcing transparency with a frontal blow. Anna, with her experience, feared the repercussions. Once they dropped this bomb, there would be no turning back. Mario, more silent, understood that they had reached a point of no return. "If we don't do it, no one will," Paula whispered, seeing the tension in Anna's face. "If we remain silent now, the lie will triumph again." Anna nodded silently. She had worked in this hospital for many years, and she knew decency could not blossom in the shadows. They had to take the risk, trust that the truth would be stronger than the powers that be. Meanwhile, behind the closed doors of the administration office, Salazar and Jenna were locked in a duel of nerves. Powerful donors, alerted by rumors seeping through the hospital's cracks, threatened to withdraw their financial support. The carefully polished reputation of San Hilario, its pride and impeccable facade, hung by a thread. Jenna, trembling, thought of 1,000 excuses: blame subordinates, deceased doctors, retired nurses. Any scapegoat would do to save her position. "I won't fall alone," Salazar growled, irritated. "If they corner us, we'll discredit Anna and Paula. We'll paint them as incompetent, as liars, as mentally unstable if necessary. No one will believe a handful of rebels without proof." Jenna tried to keep her voice calm, remembering anxiously that Anna and Paula had made copies and backups. Would that be enough to counter Salazar's prepared lies? In Pediatrics, the moral war was reflected in the exhausted expressions of the staff. Dr. Johnson struggled to stabilize a child with persistent fever, not yielding an inch in her effort, though frustration simmered inside her. Young nurses whispered that something big was about to blow up, that the secret gnawing at San Hilario was about to surface. While handling a thermometer, Johnson raised her gaze and saw Paula near the door. With a subtle gesture, Paula conveyed a message of hope. Soon there would be change, something new to push back the oppression of silence. Dr. Johnson, not understanding the details, felt an inexplicable relief, as if a fresh breeze had entered through closed windows. The rumor of justice spread, infecting those who, without knowing the whole story, sensed that a defining moment was approaching. That morning, internal tensions reached a critical point. In one corner, Anna and Paula, holding the incriminating report, chose the precise moment to present it. In another, Salazar and Jenna prepared defenses and intrigues. In the waiting areas, patients oblivious to the internal drama wondered why some faces looked so tense. In the administrative sector, Vargas wandered with lowered eyes, fearing that his failure to intercept the evidence would make him the director's first sacrificial lamb. Truth against lies, two sides at odds. One bolstered by fresh courage, indignation, and the desire to honor Scott's memory and medical ethics. The other sustained by the habit of cover-ups, the hunger for power, political connections, and donations greasing the wheels of prestige. Now those wheels were squeaking, threatening to collapse. Before heading to the medical board with Anna and Mario, Paula checked her phone once more. The photos were safe, the copies well guarded. Anna, recalling Scott's kindness, closed her eyes and took a deep breath, strengthening her resolve. Mario, having overcome his temptations and fears, prepared to testify, if necessary, on behalf of the truth. In the corridors, the atmosphere felt charged with static electricity, raising the hair on the skin of those who ignored the cause. Sometimes, an entire institution rests on lies, and one brave act is enough to break its illusion. Two sides regarded each other without words, the hospital's management and those who carried the torch of truth. It was San Hilario's internal war, a clash of irreconcilable forces on the brink of open confrontation. And deep down, everyone knew the outcome would not only change the hospital's history, but also how they understood the value of human integrity. Afternoon fell over San Hilario Hospital with a deceptive stillness. Outside, the sky turned a steely gray, foretelling rain. Inside, tension rose once more. Nathan Ortega, the freelance journalist who had been lurking for days, decided to act more boldly. After gathering fragments of rumors, the name Scott whispered in dark corners, hints of a lost report, tensions in management. He felt he was closing in on a big story, perhaps the most important of his career. He entered the hospital with a small camera on his shoulder and a recorder in his jacket pocket. His presence, far from discreet, set off alarms in the upper offices. Jenna Davis, informed at once, sent a couple of security guards to escort him out. She did not want journalists snooping around, not now that the truth was about to explode. But Nathan was not easily intimidated. He feigned interest in the facilities, asked the guards trivial questions, and in a moment of inattention, slipped down a side corridor. It was a little frequented hallway, with no chairs or distracting signs. There, Nathan ran into Dr. Johnson coming out of Pediatrics. She shuddered upon seeing him. She knew the leadership wanted no press, but could she remain silent about the children's conditions? Under the journalist's intense gaze, Johnson could only stammer that the situation was serious, that several children were worsening, that they lacked sufficient resources. Her voice trembled. She gave no concrete data, but her face was enough for Nathan to sense the desperation. While the guards resumed their pursuit, Nathan retreated, satisfied with that minimal confession. He had a name, a critical point: Pediatrics. Something was rotting between these walls, and he sensed it like a hound catching the scent of scandal. At the same time, in another corner of the hospital, Paula, summoning her courage, sought out Nathan. She found him behind a curtain, in a corridor with defective lamps that flickered. With measured words, she hinted that evidence was about to be presented that would change the hospital's history. Her voice was low, each syllable weighed. She could not hand over the proof yet. They needed the right moment, security. But she asked him to wait for the official announcement. "Stay alert," she whispered. "Soon, you'll know the truth." Nathan, excited, sensed the tremor in Paula's hands. That raw emotion was genuine. She was not a cover-up source nor an opportunist. She seemed a doctor tormented by an injustice burning beneath appearances. The journalist promised to stay close, ready to cast the story into the public eye. Paula left with a tight feeling in her chest. Exposing it all was risky, but necessary. Salazar, watching from his office through internal cameras, flew into a rage upon seeing Paula talk to Nathan. He almost slammed his desk. He cursed under his breath, blaming Jenna for not controlling the situation. He immediately ordered his ally to initiate a protocol to control the information, restrict access to archives, threaten employees with dismissal if they spoke to the press. Jenna, her hands trembling, set these measures in motion. But it was a mistake. The administration's desperate actions only sparked more suspicion among the staff. Rumors multiplied, fears grew, and the entire hospital hummed with murmurs of rebellion. In a safer corner, Anna and Mario reviewed the copies of the report exonerating Scott. They had hidden duplicates in lockers, little-used file cabinets, and Mario had even stored a digital version in the cloud at Paula's request. This was their life insurance. Even if Salazar tried to crush them with false accusations, they had the truth replicated on multiple fronts. The lie could no longer be silenced so easily. This day marked a key turning point. The atmosphere had become unbreathable. The journalist was the channel that could bring the story to the public, and Salazar knew it. Each attempt to restrict information was a clumsy patch on a dam about to burst. Paula, more determined than ever, understood that the time for discretion was running out. Soon they would have to come into the open with names, dates, and documents. Every passing second worsened the situation in Pediatrics and fed the fear within San Hilario's walls. The truth now hovered just a breath away from being known. Nathan Ortega, with his camera and recorder, roamed the corridors, evading guards, listening to half-confessions, collecting nervous glances. Anna and Mario prepared themselves mentally for the imminent clash. Jenna and Salazar felt the ground trembling beneath their feet. The hospital, in full ferment, was a volcano about to erupt. Afternoon began leaning into night, and the shadows grew longer. Soon, the curtain would fall. The journalist, the announcement, the unveiling of the evidence. Everything aligned toward an outcome in which the lie would have to face the truth with no barriers. And once those barriers were breached, they could never be raised again. The day arrived with a deceptive brightness, as if the sun insisted on highlighting San Hilario Hospital's least favored corners. The air was charged with pent-up tension, and when the administration announced an extraordinary meeting, rumors of an imminent confrontation spread through the corridors. Senior medical officers, administrative representatives, some members of the donors board, and key staff were summoned in haste. Anna and Paula received the invitation with surprise and suspicion. It was evident that Salazar planned an act of intimidation or a staged display to halt their investigations. The conference room appeared cold, antiseptic, with chairs arranged in a semicircle facing a main table. The white lights, too bright, accentuated the wrinkles on every face present. Paula felt a knot in her stomach as she took a seat beside Anna. Around them, veteran doctors, department heads, administrators and donors wore expectant expressions. Jenna Davis, frowning, muttered disjointed data to Salazar, as though trying to recite an improvised script. Jenna, trying to set the tone, started the meeting by talking about economic challenges and necessary adjustments, elegantly evading the nightmare looming over the administration. Salazar, seated next to her, maintained a stoic pose, though Paula noticed him nervously licking his lips. The atmosphere was a silent battlefield. Dr. Johnson, forehead beaded with sweat, asked to speak. Her voice was firm, though trembling, questioning the lack of resources in pediatrics and the systematic refusal to acknowledge the crisis. She mentioned the infectious outbreak, the overcrowded beds, the insufficient response. Forced to reply, Salazar limited himself to vague generalities, plans in progress, financial priorities, the abstract promise of a better future. That was when Paula stood up. Her movement drew everyone's attention. Anna, beside her, took a deep breath, preparing for the riskiest moment. Paula, in a clear voice, announced that she had something important to reveal, something that concerned the very honor of the hospital. Murmurs spread through the audience. Salazar frowned, Jenna swallowed hard. The donors narrowed their eyes with curiosity. Anna, holding a folder firmly, stepped forward. She took out the report found behind the green door, the document exonerating Scott. The silence turned so dense it could be cut with a scalpel. Anna began reading excerpts, citing the signature of the deceased nurse who had recorded the truth. She described how Scott, far from being guilty, had been a silent sacrifice. How an ambitious doctor, not explicitly named in the text, but whose identity could be deduced, had altered records to shift blame. As Anna read, Salazar visibly paled. Jenna, her face contorted, avoided meeting anyone's eyes. Several veteran doctors leaned forward, incredulous, listening to details that contradicted the official story they had swallowed for decades. Some exchanged glances, others covered their mouths with their hands, stunned. When Anna finished reading, Paula spoke. With a dangerous calm, she revealed the indirect but clear implication of Salazar in the manipulation. She laid bare Scott's innocence, making it clear that his name had been stained by a carefully maintained lie to protect the ambitions of someone willing to sacrifice the reputation of a man of integrity. The auditorium sank into an electric hush, a surge of whispers, sighs, muffled exclamations. Never before had anything like this been heard in that pristine and solemn room. Anna raised her gaze, scanning the astonished faces. For the first time, the truth was audible, tangible, and the audience's reaction was a whirlwind of pent-up emotions. Donors frowned thoughtfully. Young doctors revealed indignation in their eyes. Administrators searched for the right words to excuse themselves, flee, or simply defend the indefensible. Salazar remained frozen for a few moments, hands clenched on the chair's arms. Jenna looked on the verge of crying or crafting a desperate alibi. In that magic instant, San Hilario's historical lie shattered. It was no longer rumors or insinuations. It was a real report, a clear testimony, a fait accompli that toppled a legacy built on deceit. Anna and Paula exchanged a resolute look. They knew much remained to be done, that repercussions would be intense. But they had achieved the impossible, making the truth audible at the institution's heart. Mario, seated among the audience, smiled timidly, relieved that his moral choice was part of this ethical victory. The entire building seemed to vibrate with the energy unleashed by the exposed lie. The initial silence gave way to a growing murmur, an electric energy lighting up faces and agitating moods. San Hilario had just witnessed its own unmasking. The next move would depend on Salazar's response, on the board, on the donors, on all who had kept silent. But nothing would ever be the same. The truth had finally been made audible. The conference room, silent just seconds before at the reading of the report, became a boiling pot of voices when Salazar suddenly rose from his seat. The doctor raised his voice, trying to discredit the documents Anna and Paula had presented. With a tense face, he claimed they were invalid papers, accused the two women of seeking notoriety, and warned that the hospital would not tolerate slander without conclusive evidence. But Salazar's strategy, based on assumptions and threats, met an unexpected barrier. Mario stepped forward. With trembling hands but a firm voice, the orderly recounted his experience. How Vargas approached him, offered him money to avoid helping Anna and Paula, how he himself witnessed the administration's clumsy maneuver to cover up the matter. Each of Mario's words dealt a blow to Salazar's credibility. It became clear these weren't just old documents. There was an active, ongoing campaign to silence the truth. Dr. Johnson, until then focused on the pediatrics crisis, took a breath and spoke up. She talked about the infectious outbreak in her department, about the pressure to downplay the problem, about the administrative hurdles blocking access to resources. She pointed out that the lack of transparency that ruined Scott was the same that now condemned sick children to inadequate care. Her voice broke as she described the children's suffering, but her message was crystal clear. Concealment wasn't a thing of the past. It lived on in the current administration. That testimony ignited other employees. An older nurse with 30 years of service raised her hand and added that she remembered Scott's era, how he was respected and beloved, and how one day he vanished after a strange scandal. She herself had been warned not to ask questions. An old orderly with a rough voice confirmed rumors that had circulated back then. The administration manipulated records, blamed the innocent, sacrificed reputations to protect promising careers. As more voices joined in, tensions skyrocketed. Jenna Davis, trying to save face, called for calm, promising internal audits and detailed reviews. But her vague promises convinced no one anymore. The donor board members exchanged looks of displeasure. Some murmured that, had they known earlier, they would never have funded certain projects. The hospital's meticulously polished reputation wavered under the avalanche of testimonies. Amid the chaos, Nathan Ortega, the journalist, took advantage of the confusion to slip into the room. With his camera rolling from the back, he recorded the scene, aware he was witnessing a historic moment. Every word, every gesture, every look of disbelief and anger was captured by his lens. Ortega thought that rarely had a scandal been unveiled so bluntly before such a stunned audience. Dr. Federico Smith, Paula's father, sat among the crowd, pale and surprised. He had attended expecting some reassuring speech, but instead he found the truth pouring forth in torrents. Paula, heart constricted, could not hold back. She confronted him publicly. "Dad, did you know something about this? Did you know and never investigate?" Dr. Smith fell silent. Ashamed, he admitted weakly that in the past there had been rumors he chose to ignore out of comfort or fear. A loaded silence stretched across the room, a silence heavy on their consciences. The father's figure, the respected surgeon, was now stained by his passivity in the face of injustice. Paula looked at him with tearful, disappointed eyes, feeling the moral wound reopen. Salazar, trying to maintain composure, realized he had run out of allies. Even his old colleagues viewed him suspiciously, perhaps recalling episodes they themselves had overlooked. In a few minutes, the lie that supported his career for decades crumbled before his eyes. What took years to build through deceit and pressure was collapsing in minutes. The lie, embodied in the scandal that tarnished Scott's name, melted under the heat of truth. The hospital's prestige, its most prized jewel, wavered. But at the same time, the truth emerged with unstoppable force, sweeping away veils and excuses. No one could now deny Scott's innocence. No one could justify the silence that condemned him. No one could look at Anna and Paula without feeling admiration for their courage. The conference room was filled with an electric murmur, a frenzy of uncontrolled emotions. While Anna held the report against her chest, Paula grappled with conflicting feelings. Mario breathed a sigh of relief. Johnson straightened her back with dignity, and Nathan Ortega captured the footage that confirmed his suspicion. San Hilario had been unmasked. Change was no longer a possibility. It was a fait accompli. Under everyone's incredulous gaze, the hospital discarded its spotless mask and showed its true face. The world would know the truth, and with it, the hope of a more honest San Hilario could finally emerge. The conference room burned with debates and confrontations. While doctors, donors, and administrators traded accusations and excuses, Anna felt a subtle pull in her chest, an urgency she could not postpone. She had to leave the chaos behind and head to the old man's room. He who had carried in his pocket the photograph that set off the final stage of this story. Now that the truth had emerged, she needed to share the outcome with him, to ensure he knew that the sacrifice of an innocent man would not be forgotten. With firm steps, she left the room, ignoring the murmurs around her. Paula, moved and still trembling from the intensity of events, followed her without hesitation. They left behind the shouting in the auditorium, the whirlwind of emotions shredding lies in real time. Now they headed toward a space of calm, an intimate atmosphere where words and newly won justice could have deeper meaning. The corridor leading to the old man's room seemed quieter than ever, as if the hospital held its breath watching them pass. Paula walked behind Anna, noticing the subtle trembling of her companion's shoulders and feeling her own emotions welling up in her throat. Upon reaching the door, Anna took a second to steady her breathing before turning the handle. Finding the old man meant confronting the weight of halted time. He lay in bed with grey sheets, his breathing as light as a whisper in the dimness. The machines beeped at their usual rhythm, a mechanical heartbeat sustaining a life on the brink. The man's face bore an ancient weariness, the mark of many decades of silence, injustice, and unanswered waiting. Anna approached the bedside, Paula at her side. The old man seemed to sense their presence. He half opened his eyes, cloudy eyes, but in that opacity, a faint spark glimmered, an intuitive recognition. Anna, voice soft and trembling, leaned in to speak. "We did it," she whispered. "Everything will be known now. The truth has finally come to light. Your name will be remembered with honor, not as a guilty man, but as the noble one you were." Paula felt tears moistening her lashes. She had never seen Anna so vulnerable, so close to sincere weeping. The room seemed to hold its own atmosphere, a dense silence filled with meaning. Anna continued, "Your sacrifice wasn't in vain. I promise that the hospital will know your true story, and never again will such an injustice be allowed within these walls." The old man, Dr. Scott himself, reacted with a slight movement. His ragged breathing found a different rhythm, as if he recognized the words. Although he didn't utter a coherent syllable, his hand sought Anna's. The nurse offered hers, and he, with the scant strength he had left, squeezed her fingers, establishing a final connection between past and present. Paula, watching, knew this gesture was a farewell of profound significance. In Anna's eyes shone the emotion transmitted by her message. Justice had been done. Scott's weary features relaxed slightly. A faint smile, barely a trace, appeared on his cracked lips. He needed no words. Deep inside, he understood that his innocence had been acknowledged, that the stain on his name would vanish like fog in the sunlight. With one last slow, deep exhalation, Dr. Scott closed his eyes. His hand loosened its grip on Anna's. The nurse felt the weight of the years vanish in that instant. Paula, shaken, held Anna by the shoulders. Anna wept silently, serene tears that slid down without sobs, a cry of both relief and sadness. Decades had been lost, but not dignity. The man who endured monstrous injustice now departed knowing that his story would be set straight before the collective memory. Outside, the world went on, the conference room flooded with reproaches and regret, nurses checking their rounds, patients waiting for their treatments. But in that room, a serene calm reigned, the end of a long moral ordeal. Scott said goodbye, leaving the certainty that the truth may take its time, but in the end, it liberates. Anna and Paula were there as witnesses to that conclusion, aware that the task of healing San Hilario was not over, but at least the first great step, restoring the honor of a good man, had been taken. The news spread like wildfire through the city. Just hours after Scott's death and the revelation before the board, Nathan Ortega, the freelance journalist who had persistently followed the case, published a forceful article on his site, "The Truth Behind the Scott Case." The headline, simple and crushing, accompanied a lengthy, detailed report with excerpts of documents, statements, and testimonies, painting a faithful picture of the scandal San Hilario had hidden for decades. The following day, local media echoed the news. Radio programs debated the hospital's credibility and Scott's figure, now presented as a silent hero. Television showed images of the meeting, of Paula's and Anna's statements, and of members of the administration walking with heads lowered, avoiding the cameras. Social networks filled with indignant comments, reminding everyone that medicine, above all else, is an honest service to patients. The influential donor family, which for years had supported certain hospital wings with substantial funds, felt horrified to have been deceived. They, who believed they were investing in prestige and integrity, discovered they had been financing a system of lies. Without hesitation, they publicly announced the immediate withdrawal of their financial support. It was a harsh blow. San Hilario, accustomed to silent injections of capital, now had to face a financial and reputational quake. Under legal and public pressure, Jenna Davis, the administrative director complicit in the cover-up, resigned. Without elaborate excuses, she simply left, aware that health authorities and judicial agencies would initiate proceedings to assign responsibility. Dr. Salazar, principal suspect and architect of the machine of deceit, was suspended immediately. An official investigation began in earnest, promising to expose all involved in the plot that ruined Scott's reputation and affected the hospital's quality of care. Young staff members, especially resident doctors, newly hired nurses and aides, received the news with a mix of astonishment and relief. Finally, the invisible monster that oppressed them, the culture of silence and manipulation, had been mortally wounded. They acknowledged the courage of Anna and Paula, the main drivers of change. Johnson, in Pediatrics, breathed easier. At last she received the support she had requested. Specialists in hospital infections were hired, emergency supplies arrived, stricter protocols were established. Those children who had suffered due to institutional indifference were now starting to receive proper care. Even though the hospital trembled from the loss of funds and public image, honesty brought renewed hope. A painful truth was preferable to a shining lie. With its prestige damaged, the institution would have to rebuild from within with solid values. Transparency, ethics, and empathy, so often confined to speeches rather than practice, once again became the priority. Mario, the orderly who had refused the bribe, felt immense relief. Although he lacked the easy financial resources Vargas had offered, his conscience was at peace. Several colleagues congratulated him with admiration, knowing the hospital could now be a more dignified place to work. Mario walked with his head held high, knowing his moral choice had contributed to a greater good. External health authorities soon arrived to audit and assist in the transition. They inspected the hospital with critical eyes, reviewing clinical records, internal policies, working conditions. The goal wasn't senseless punishment, but guiding toward real transformation. San Hilario, humiliated but not destroyed, welcomed the help. Many understood that such a profound crisis could be the seed of moral and professional renewal. A feeling of catharsis swept through the corridors, like a breeze carrying away old dust. In waiting rooms, patients were no longer seen as threats to the hospital's image, but as the very reason for its existence. Anna, after so many decades of service, saw in the eyes of the new generation of nurses and doctors a spark of regained idealism. Paula, her career just beginning, understood that she had chosen medicine for the right reasons, and now she would work in a healthier environment. The lie, that rotten root that had fed corrupt hierarchies, was painfully uprooted. The hospital bled reputationally, but the wound was necessary to cure the moral infection. At the end of the day, Anna and Paula walked together down a corridor, lit by a clearer light. Before them opened an uncertain but more promising future, a stage in which San Hilario could finally honor the Hippocratic oath without betraying its essence. The entire city debated the scandal, the press followed every step of the investigation, and the hospital restructured itself with humility. And within its walls, no longer suffocated by secrecy, everyone, from the orderly to the surgeon, could breathe a gulp of clean air. Honesty had come at a high price, but the moral victory was undeniable. On the pediatrics floor, the atmosphere had changed dramatically. For weeks, the hospital-acquired infection threatened to spiral out of control. But now, after the arrival of specialists and the honest allocation of resources, the infection rate dropped encouragingly. Dr. Johnson, previously exhausted and on the verge of tears, smiled in relief as she reviewed the medical charts. The children were improving, the mothers were calmer, and the panic that once ruled the corridors had given way to renewed hope. Paula, wearing her spotless white coat and with a stethoscope hanging from her neck, worked with dedication. Each patient was treated with scientific rigor and empathy. She remembered the days when she had to hide her indignation at injustices, suppress her criticism under unfair pressure. Now she was different, no longer the insecure, idealistic young woman who questioned whether it was worth challenging the system. After having exposed the scandal and witnessed the hospital's moral reform, Paula was now a doctor with unbreakable principles, someone who knew that truth and professional ethics were not mere decorations, but the very heart of medicine. In another room, Anna cared for an elderly patient with cardiac problems. She adjusted an IV, checked vitals, and at the same time perceived subtle changes in San Hilario's atmosphere. The nurses chatted more freely, without fear of reprimand for raising needs or making suggestions. Requests for supplies were taken seriously, no longer ignored or marginalized due to opaque budget considerations. Medical decisions, rather than being filtered through the prism of image and political interests, were respected for their clinical value. It was true the hospital had lost a great deal of money and donations after its scandalized patrons withdrew. But paradoxically, it had gained legitimacy and credibility with the community. The echo of the revealed truth had resonated deeply, and the external health authorities, still auditing and assisting in the transition, commented approvingly on the new transparency measures. Though the journey toward financial recovery would be long, San Hilario now presented itself as an honest institution, with moral foundations more solid than before. While Anna prescribed a new medication for her patient, She thought of Scott and the old man who turned out to be him. She remembered the promise made at her mentor's bedside, that his sacrifice would not be in vain, that his name would be vindicated. That commitment had been fulfilled. And now, as she treated this unknown elderly patient, she saw in each treatment an extension of that promise, a tribute to the honest medicine Scott embodied. On a break, Anna stepped into the corridor and found Mario, who smiled gratefully at her. Mario had chosen the hard path, rejecting a bribe that could have solved immediate financial problems, but at the cost of his conscience. Now the hospital was undergoing a period of catharsis and acceptance of the truth, and life, unexpectedly, seemed to reward his honesty. Mario handed Anna a piece of paper, emotion glinting in his eyes. It was a letter from a charitable foundation, moved by the hospital's story and the moral struggle they had waged. This organization offered to help cover most of the costs for his mother's operation. Anna was genuinely happy for him, commenting calmly, "Sometimes honesty finds unexpected ways of being repaid. You did the right thing, and though the road was hard, look how life returns acts of goodness." Mario smiled and pressed the nurse's hand, grateful. Trusting Anna had been the cornerstone of his moral decision, and now, with the hospital's wounds healing, he saw that he had not only helped cleanse the institution, but his own life had taken a more dignified turn. Paula appeared beside them, notes in hand. She had to return to Pediatrics, but first she exchanged a knowing glance with Anna and Mario. No words were needed to acknowledge that they had formed an improbable team, forged in the crucible of injustice. Through their collective effort, they had exposed the lie, restored Scott's memory, and driven real change in the hospital's culture. Now, each in their role, contributed to improving patient care. A feeling of lightness floated in the air. Without the suffocating burden of lies, the hospital was not only more honest, it was becoming more human. The sick were heard, needs were met, and medical decisions were free of undue pressures. Although San Hilario needed time to complete its renewal, the foundation was laid. In the distance, the hum of monitors, the rolling of gurneys, the discreet conversations seemed more harmonious. The wounds of the past, both historical and recent, began to heal. With head held high, Paula returned to Pediatrics. Anna continued her rounds. Mario thought of his mother's smile upon receiving the news. Each followed their own path, knowing that at last the hospital breathed cleaner air. And in that breath of hope, medicine recovered its purest and most dignified sense. A gentle light filtered through the windows, painting the hospital's walls in soft tones. After the upheaval of the past few weeks, San Hilario breathed a calmer air, though much remained to be rebuilt. In a quiet room designated for discreet meetings, Paula waited. She had asked her father, Dr. Federico Smith, to come, wanting to close the emotional gap opened between them by the Scott scandal. He arrived with uncertain steps, head bowed, hands clasped at stomach level like a reprimanded schoolboy. Paula, seated by a simple table, looked up without rancor, only with a mix of sadness and resolve. Dr. Smith took a chair facing her, let out a sigh, and dared to begin. "Daughter, I know I have no excuses. For years I knew or suspected something was off with Scott's case, but I preferred to look the other way. Out of comfort, fear of compromising my position, my prestige. Now I see that remaining silent was also a form of complicity." Paula, tears subtly forming, said nothing at first. Her father continued, voice breaking. "I admire your courage, Paula. I, who always urged you to protect your career, to maintain your reputation, realized that medicine is not just about that. It's about healing bodies, yes, but also about righting wrongs, defending the truth when it's in danger. Your bravery showed me the path I failed to walk." She lowered her gaze, recalling the disappointment and pain felt when facing her father's cowardice. But she also remembered Scott's sacrifice, Anna's determination, Mario's honesty, and the change brought about in the whole hospital. Without those brave steps, nothing would have improved. A knot formed in her throat as she listened to her father apologize, not only in words, but with a humility she had never before seen in him. "Dad, I know we all make mistakes," Paula finally replied softly. "I know fear and habit can make us keep silent. What matters is that now you understand what you did wrong and admit it. I forgive you, because I understand we're human. But above all, because you've learned the lesson. Medicine isn't just technique. It's ethics. It's humanity." Dr. Smith felt immense relief, as if a yoke fell from his shoulders. He leaned toward his daughter and clasped her hand between his, grateful for that moral clemency. She, with tears clear and pure, smiled with sadness and hope. Now they knew that, united, they could help build a more integral hospital. Meanwhile, Anna continued her daily work. While adjusting an IV in the ICU, a group of young nurses entered the room with a bouquet of wildflowers. They smiled shyly, handed her the flowers, and a note thanking Anna for opening the way, for showing that courage and honesty were possible in the healthcare world. Anna blushed, uncomfortable with the praise, remembering Scott. In her mind, he was still present, that wise mentor who inspired her from the start and whose memory now rested in peace. Holding the flowers, Anna looked out the window, imagining Scott smiling with approval. He had taught her that medicine needed more than knowledge, it needed values. Now the hospital had learned that lesson collectively, and she, a veteran nurse, felt satisfied that she had helped rescue lost dignity. Outside, journalist Nathan Ortega, satisfied with the first big scoop that exposed the scandal, prepared a second report. This time more in-depth, not just about Scott's case, but about the role of the brave staff, Anna, Paula, Mario, and others, who had confronted the corrupt system. He wanted to tell the story of the moral resistance that changed San Hilario's course. With his camera and notebook, Nathan planned longer interviews, capturing not only the dark past, but the transitioning present. The hospital's public image, still wounded, was shifting, from an elitist, opaque center to one that, after the catharsis of scandal, was undergoing healing and improvement. Public opinion, initially indignant and disappointed, now applauded the courageous turn. In the end, acknowledging and correcting errors was the first step toward true greatness. When the day ended, Paula left the hospital and said goodbye to her father with a heartfelt hug. Anna, holding the bouquet, bid farewell to the young nurses with smiles and words of gratitude. Mario, in another corner, reviewed some forms with a new lightness in his heart. An air of reconciliation and redemption pervaded every gesture. And so, in the twilight that painted the sky with golden hues, San Hilario moved toward a more honest, more compassionate era. Present wounds began to heal, and behind each noble action, Scott's shadow and his sacrifice illuminated the moral path to follow. Several weeks had passed since the definitive revelation, since the collapse of the lie that stained Scott's name, and the rediscovery of the nobility his figure represented. Under the gentle light of a new dawn, San Hilario Hospital seemed lighter, as if the air flowed more freely through its corridors. Things were not yet perfect, but a gust of honesty had swept in, cleaning dark corners and restoring dignity to the practice of medicine. In the main lobby, where once hung portraits of wealthy benefactors and photographs of old inaugurations, now stood a space dedicated to memory and recovered justice. Anna, in her spotless uniform and hair tied in a simple bun, leaned forward to place an old photo in a prominent spot on the wall. It was the image of her nurse graduation decades ago. There she was, young and hopeful, and beside her stood Dr. Richard Scott, the mentor who inspired her from the start. Now, next to that time-worn image, a commemorative plaque shone with carefully engraved letters. In recognition of Dr. Richard Scott, an upright and selfless physician, posthumously exonerated of all guilt. His honor, finally restored, lights the moral path of San Hilario Hospital. Anna took a few steps back, hands clasped in front of her lap, contemplating the whole scene. she felt a lump in her throat. There, before everyone, the truth he had deserved in life was proclaimed. Scott was no longer the invisible villain, the maligned phantom. Now his name was taught to new residents as an example of virtues without deceit. For Anna, it was as if her mentor could finally rest in peace. Paula arrived from another corridor, stopping beside the plaque. She observed the dedication with a gentle smile. In those tense days, she had learned that the profession she had chosen required not only technical skill, but also moral courage. Defending the truth, even when it cost blood, sweat, and tears, was part of the Hippocratic oath that the world sometimes forgot. Around her, some young doctors approached, murmuring in admiration, understanding that medicine is not limited to scalpels and diagnoses. Integrity was the pillar supporting every noble action. Dr. Johnson, passing by on her way to check an appointment in Pediatrics, nodded silently upon seeing the plaque. She remembered the recent hardships, the struggle for resources, the panic over the hospital-acquired infection. Thanks to the purge of lies, services had improved, specialists had been hired, and transparent protocols established. At last, she could dedicate herself to healing children without the suffocating weight of a corrupt administration. Mario appeared behind Paula with a genuine smile. He had good news. His mother would be operated on in a couple of days. After its moral transformation, the hospital had signed agreements with new healthcare organizations and charitable foundations willing to collaborate. This was a counterbalance to the dirty money that had left. Now clean money, accompanied by solidarity, arrived with no blackmail or hush money attached. Mario thought of the bribe he had refused. Choosing honesty had been the first step toward earning this unexpected reward. Anna, who approached them at that moment, commented kindly, "Sometimes honesty finds paths we never imagined. I'm very happy for you and your mother." Mario nodded, moved. He knew that Anna's trust and wise words, Paula's brave actions, the silent support of Johnson and other noble employees had made this change possible. San Hilario's transformation wasn't the achievement of a single person, but the consequence of decent acts adding up, of wills refusing to accept lies as the norm. With the plaque's intimate ceremony concluded, Anna said goodbye with a brief nod. She was tired, but at peace. Before leaving the corridor, she looked out the window and contemplated the hospital's rhythm. Patients, doctors, nurses, orderlies, all carried the lesson of what had happened in their words, their expressions, their daily interactions. San Hilario wasn't perfect, but now it breathed with greater honesty. Empathy and justice had entered through the front door, settling in with no intention of leaving. As Anna walked away, Paula ran her hand over the commemorative plaque, as if sealing a pact with Scott's memory and the ethics he represented. The truth, at last, had prevailed, and that moral triumph propelled a more dignified, more human future, faithful to the essence of medicine, healing not only bodies, but also consciences, structures, and the very foundations of the institution. The morning light continued to illuminate the lobby, outlining the faces of those who stopped to read the plaque. The hospital, with its legacy reclaimed, was no longer a prisoner of the past or of lies. Now it could look ahead with head held high, knowing that truth is always the most solid foundation upon which to build a true calling of service. Thank you for joining us this far. This story taught us that truth, honesty, and moral courage are the best medicine against injustice. If it inspired you, share this legacy with others. Until next time.